London kneels to power, and nobody wields it like Duke Lucien Blackthorne. Watch him destroy enemies without lifting a finger. Watch nobility tremble at his silence. Watch a bankrupt earl sell his daughter like livestock to survive. This is not a fairy tale. This is war disguised as marriage. And before this story ends, you'll see a monster learn to bleed. Stay until the final word. Drop your city in the comments. Hit that like button. You're going to need something to hold on to. The chapel stood empty except for shadows and the smell of old stone. Lucien Blackthorne arrived precisely at noon, dressed in black from collar to boots, his carriage rolling through London streets like a hearse. Crowds parted without being asked. Merchants lowered their eyes. Even the beggars knew better than to approach a man who could erase bloodlines with a signature. The Duke of Ravenscar owned half of Northumberland and controlled the other half through debts nobody could refuse. 42 years old, never married, never needed to be. Women threw themselves at his title, while their fathers calculated dowries like battlefield strategy. Politicians traded favors for 5 minutes of his attention. The king himself sent birthday wishes Lucien never answered. Power was the only language Lucien spoke fluently, and he never wasted words. His boots echoed against marble as he entered the chapel, where Earl Richard Whitmore waited beside the altar, sweating through expensive wool despite the autumn cold. The earl's hands shook. His face carried the gray pallor of a man watching his empire collapse in real time. Lucien stopped 3 feet away and said nothing. The silence did the work. Richard Whitmore had gambled everything on shipping routes that never materialized and investments that evaporated overnight. Creditors circled his estate like wolves. His title meant nothing without money to defend it. He had one asset left: his daughter. Lucien had received the proposal 6 weeks ago. A marriage contract written in desperation and signed in blood that might as well have been ink. The Earl offered Lady Eveline Whitmore in exchange for absorbing debts that would have destroyed 3 smaller families. No dowry, no negotiation, just survival purchased with a virgin sacrifice. Lucien accepted within an hour, not because he wanted a wife, because he wanted Whitmore's coastal properties and the leverage that came from owning a man completely. Marriage was just another acquisition. Love was a weakness his father had died choking on. "Your Grace," the Earl began, his voice cracking, "I cannot express my gratitude for your generosity in this matter of— Where is she?" Richard flinched. "My daughter is preparing in the vestry. She understands the arrangement. She will not cause difficulties." "Why?" Jens. Lucien's expression never changed. "I don't require her understanding. I require her presence at Ravenscar Castle by nightfall. The contracts are signed. This ceremony is a formality." "Of course, Your Grace. Of course." The chapel doors opened. Lady Eveline Whitmore entered alone. Lucien turned slowly, and for exactly 3 seconds, something shifted beneath his armor. She was beautiful in the way storms were beautiful, dangerous, unpredictable. Her gown was silver silk that moved like water. Her dark hair pulled back to expose a neck that seemed too delicate to support the weight of what she was about to carry. But her eyes were what stopped him. Green, sharp, unafraid. Most women looked at Lucien Blackthorne and saw either a monster or a prize. Eveline Whitmore looked at him like he was neither, like he was simply a problem she intended to survive. She walked toward the altar without hesitation. No tears, no trembling. Just cold, perfect composure that reminded Lucien uncomfortably of himself. The priest performed the ceremony in 7 minutes. Nobody objected. Nobody celebrated. When Lucien slipped the Blackthorne ring onto Eveline's finger, her hand remained steady. When he kissed her, it was mechanical. A transaction completed. A contract sealed. The new Duchess of Ravenscar tasted like winter and resignation. They left the chapel as husband and wife without speaking a single word to each other. But Ravenscar Castle rose from the Northumberland cliffs like something built to break ships and men with equal efficiency. The carriage ride from London took 6 hours through countryside that grew darker and colder with every mile. Lucien spent the journey reviewing ledgers while Eveline sat across from him in silence, watching England transform from civilization into wilderness. Rain began falling as they crossed into Blackthorne territory. The castle appeared through fog like a fortress designed by someone who understood that beauty was just another weapon. Black stone towers clawed at storm clouds. The sea crashed against cliffs 200 feet below, sending spray high enough to touch the outer walls. Every window glowed with firelight that looked more like warning beacons than welcome. Eveline's face revealed nothing, but Lucien noticed her fingers tighten against the carriage seat. Good. Fear was honest. The main gates opened as their carriage approached, and 50 servants stood waiting in perfect formation despite the rain. Every face lowered as Lucien stepped out. Every body bowed as he passed. He had trained them well. Lucien offered his hand to Eveline without looking at her. She took it, stepping down into rain that immediately soaked through her traveling cloak. Her shoes were impractical. Her dress was designed for London drawing rooms, not northern winters. She would learn. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Kane, approached with an umbrella. 60 years old, spine like iron, loyalty purchased through decades of perfect discretion. Your Grace, your rooms are prepared. Dinner will be served at 8. The Duchess requires a lady's maid and appropriate wardrobe. Handle it. Of course, Your Grace. Lucien turned to Eveline. Mrs. Kane will show you to your chambers. Do not wander the castle alone. The corridors are extensive, and I dislike searching for misplaced property. Something flickered across Eveline's face. Anger, maybe, or recognition. She understood exactly what she had become. Yes, Your Grace, she said quietly. Lucien walked away without waiting for her response. He had shipments to review, letters to answer, and a minor lord in Newcastle who needed reminding that debts to House Blackthorne were not negotiable. His new wife could decorate whatever room she wanted. It changed nothing. Tab. The Duchess's chambers occupied the east wing, overlooking the sea. Eveline stood at the window for 20 minutes after Mrs. Kane left, watching waves destroy themselves against rocks that had stood for 1,000 years. The room was beautiful in a cold, perfect way. Silk wallpaper, mahogany furniture, a bed large enough to drown in. Everything expensive, nothing warm. She had expected this. Her father had explained the arrangement with the emotional depth of a livestock auction. Lucien Blackthorne needed coastal access and political leverage. Richard Whitmore needed money and survival. Eveline was the currency that balanced both equations. Love was never mentioned. Hope was not discussed. She was 23 years old, educated in music and French and needlepoint, trained to smile through dinner parties where men talked over her and women evaluated her like breeding stock. Her entire life had been preparation for exactly this transaction. Marriage to a powerful man who would own her completely. The only surprise was how thoroughly Lucien Blackthorne had stripped away any pretense that ownership could be gentle. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Enter, a young woman appeared, barely 20, carrying fabric samples and wearing the careful expression of someone who had learned not to make mistakes. Your Grace, I am Sarah. I've been assigned as your lady's maid. Mrs. Kane instructed me to begin preparing your wardrobe for— Stop. Sarah froze. Eveline turned from the window. What are you afraid of? The question clearly terrified Sarah more than silence would have. I don't understand, Your Grace. You're shaking. Why? Sarah's eyes dropped. Forgive me, Your Grace. I will do better. Eveline crossed the room slowly, studying the girl who would dress her and undress her and know every vulnerability a body could hide. Has the Duke hurt you? Sarah's head snapped up, shock breaking through training. No! His Grace is— He is fair. Demanding, but fair. He has never— She stopped, realizing she had said too much. Never what? He has never touched any of us, Your Grace. Not in that way. Lord Ashford, who visited last month, he tried to corner one of the kitchen girls. His Grace found out. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. Lord Ashford left Ravenscar Castle with a broken hand and half his fortune transferred to the girl's family. We are property here, Your Grace, but His Grace protects his property absolutely. Eveline absorbed this information carefully. So Lucien Blackthorne had rules. Boundaries. A code that separated him from common predators. It was not kindness, it was control. But perhaps control could be negotiated with. Thank you, Sarah. That will be all for tonight. The girl curtsied and fled, clearly relieved to escape without punishment. Eveline returned to the window. Far below, she could see Lucien walking the castle battlements alone, his black coat whipping in wind that would have frozen anyone else. He moved like a man patrolling territory he had conquered personally, every step deliberate, every glance calculated. He had bought her like furniture, but furniture could be rearranged, and Eveline Whitmore had not survived her father's collapse by accepting helplessness as destiny. Dinner was served in the Great Hall at exactly 8 o'clock. The room could have held 200 guests, but tonight contained only 2. Lucien sat at the head of a table that stretched 30 feet, Eveline positioned at his right hand, close enough for conversation, far enough to emphasize the distance between them. Servants moved through candlelight like ghosts, pouring wine and delivering courses without making a sound. Roasted venison, potatoes and cream, vegetables Eveline didn't recognize. Everything perfectly prepared, nothing warm. Lucien ate with mechanical efficiency, reading correspondence between bites. Eveline watched him for 5 minutes before speaking. Does the Duke of Ravenscar ever look at his wife? Or am I simply another ledger entry you review at month's end? His fork paused halfway to his mouth. Slowly, Lucien set down his utensils and turned his full attention toward her. His eyes were gray, flat, the color of winter ice over deep water. You wish to be acknowledged? I wish to understand the rules of my captivity. Something almost resembling amusement touched his mouth. Almost. You are not captive. You are married. The distinction matters legally. And practically? Practically, you will manage household affairs, attend social functions as required, and produce an heir within 2 years. In exchange, you will have access to wealth most women only imagine, protection from any threat, and freedom to pursue whatever interests do not interfere with your obligations. Eveline sipped her wine slowly. How generous. I assume my interests do not include leaving Ravenscar without permission? Correct. Or maintaining correspondence my husband has not reviewed? Was? Correct. Or refusing to share his bed when summoned? Lucien's expression hardened. I have never summoned anyone to my bed. I am not interested in forcing intimacy from women too afraid to refuse. Then how do you plan to acquire your heir, Your Grace? The question hung in candlelight like a blade. Lucien leaned back in his chair, studying her with the focus he usually reserved for contracts that might contain hidden traps. When you are ready, you will come to me. Not because I demand it, because you understand that survival in this world requires choosing your battles carefully. Fighting me is pointless. Working with me is profitable. How romantic. Romance is a fantasy sold to women who have never seen what power actually costs. I will never lie to you, Eveline. I will never pretend this marriage is anything except strategy. But I will protect you absolutely, betray you never, and ensure you want for nothing except the fairy tale you were raised to expect. Eveline set down her glass carefully. And if I told you the fairy tale is all I ever wanted? Then you would be lying. You are your father's daughter. You understand exactly how much pretty illusions cost when creditors arrive demanding payment. The word struck deeper than he probably intended. Because he was right. Eveline had grown up watching her mother cling to romance while her father gambled away their future. She had seen firsthand how love without power was just another bankruptcy waiting to happen. Lucien Blackthorne offered no love, but he offered something rarer, honesty. I accept your terms, Your Grace. Lucien nodded once. Good. You are dismissed. Eveline rose, then paused. One question. Ask? Why me? You could have chosen any woman in England. Why accept my father's desperate offer? For the first time since the ceremony, Lucien's mask slipped for exactly 3 seconds. Because you entered that chapel without crying, without begging, without performing the tragedy every other woman would have weaponized for sympathy. You understood the transaction and accepted it cleanly. That kind of strength is rare. He returned to his correspondence without another word. Eveline walked back to her chambers with her mind calculating faster than her heart could process. She had been purchased, but purchase implied value, and value could be leveraged. 3 weeks passed in careful performance. Eveline learned Ravenscar's rhythms the way she had once learned piano. Morning belonged to household management. Mrs. Kane provided detailed reports on servants, supplies, and necessary repairs. The castle was massive, complex, and required constant maintenance that Lucien clearly had no interest in managing personally. Eveline took control of it methodically. She interviewed every senior servant. She reviewed budgets. She identified inefficiencies and solved them quietly. The steward tried to dismiss her input twice before realizing the new duchess had her husband's complete authority in domestic matters. After that, resistance evaporated. Afternoons were hers. She explored the castle carefully, mapping corridors that twisted through stone like a maze designed to confuse invaders. She discovered the library, 10,000 books organized by subject and language. She found the conservatory where winter roses bloomed despite the cold. She located the armory where weapons from 3 centuries hung like trophies. And every evening, she dined with Lucienus in the great hall while he read correspondence, and she asked questions designed to sound innocent. What properties did House Blackthorne control? How did northern lords maintain power during parliamentary transitions? Which families posed the greatest threats to Ravenscar's dominance? Lucien answered everything with clinical precision. He was teaching her. Perhaps without fully realizing it, he was giving her the education and power that no finishing school would ever provide. He explained how debt could be weaponized, how marriages were political treaties, how information was currency more valuable than gold. Eveline absorbed everything and revealed nothing. At night, alone in her chamber, she wrote letters to her sister Catherine, letters she never sent because Lucien would have read them. Instead, she burned each one in the fireplace and watched smoke carry words into darkness. The Duke had been honest about their arrangement, but honesty was just another form of control, and Eveline was learning to recognize all its variations. The first test arrived on a Tuesday. Eveline was reviewing kitchen budgets when Sarah burst into the study without knocking, her face pale. "Your Grace, there's a situation in the village. Mrs. Kane sent me to fetch you." "What kind of situation?" "The blacksmith's daughter. She's been accused of theft by Lord Ashford's steward. They're holding her in the square." Eveline rose immediately. "Where is the Duke?" "Riding the northern estates. He won't return until evening." "Perfect." Eveline grabbed her cloak and followed Sarah through corridors that led to the castle's main gate. Outside, rain fell in sheets that turned the courtyard into a small sea. The village sat a quarter-mile down the hill, clustered around Ravenscar's shadow like children huddling near a fire. By the time Eveline reached the village square, a crowd had gathered. A girl, 16, maybe 17, knelt in mud while a man in expensive livery held her arm with enough force to leave bruises. Lord Ashford's steward, the same Lord Lucien had expelled for assaulting servants. She was caught with silver from Lord Ashford's estate, the steward announced loudly. Theft is punishable by imprisonment or worse. The girl was crying. "I didn't steal anything. He gave it to me." "Silence, whore." Eveline pushed through the crowd. "Release her." The steward turned, shock and irritation warring across his face when he recognized the Duchess. "Your Grace, this is a matter of law. I said release her, now." He hesitated. Eveline could see this calculation happening behind his eyes. She was new, untested, a woman who had been purchased, not chosen. Maybe she could be ignored. Big mistake. Eveline stepped closer, using every inch of aristocratic authority she had been trained to wield. "You are on Blackthorne land. That girl is a Blackthorne tenant. You will release her immediately, or I will have you dragged before the Duke, and explain why you chose to ignore his wife's direct command." The crowd went silent. The steward's grip loosened. "Your Grace, Lord Ashford specifically, Lord Ashford was banished from Ravenscar 3 months ago. His authority here ended the moment my husband broke his hand. If you wish to join him in exile, continue arguing. If you wish to leave with your position intact, apologize to this girl and return to whatever hole you crawled from." The steward's face turned crimson, but he released the girl. "My apologies," he muttered, louder. "I apologize for the misunderstanding." Eveline turned to the girl, who was staring at her like she had just witnessed a miracle. "What is your name?" "Mary, Your Grace." "Mary, go home. If anyone from Lord Ashford's estate troubles you again, send word to the castle immediately." The girl nodded frantically and fled. The steward left without another word, and the crowd began to dispersing, whispering among themselves. Eveline walked back to Ravenscar through rain that soaked her completely, her heart pounding with adrenaline and something dangerously close to satisfaction. She had just wielded power, real power, and it felt like nothing she had ever experienced. Lucien returned at sunset. Eveline was in the library pretending to read when she heard his boots in the corridor. He entered without knocking, still wearing riding clothes, his expression unreadable. "You intervened in the village today." "Not a question." "I did." "Lord Ashford's steward filed a complaint." "I assumed he would." Lucien crossed to the fireplace. Tien, studying her with the intensity of a general reviewing battlefield reports. "You humiliated one of the few noble families still willing to trade with Ravenscar. You overruled established authority. You made enemies within 6 hours of acting independently." Eveline closed her book carefully. "I protected a Blackthorne tenant from false accusations. I enforced your previous judgment regarding Lord Ashford, warns. And I demonstrated that the Duchess of Ravenscar will not tolerate abuse on her land. If that creates enemies, so be it." Silence stretched between them. Tishkiyimi. Silence stretched. Then Lucien did something Eveline had never seen. He smiled. Not the cold, controlled expression he used in public. A real smile. Brief, genuine, dangerous. "Good." Eveline blinked. "Good?" "You understood the situation correctly. Ashford's steward was testing boundaries. If you had ignored the incident, every minor lord in Northumberland would have concluded the new Duchess was decorative. Instead, you made it clear that Ravenscar's authority is absolute regardless of which Blackthorne wields it." He moved closer, and Eveline forced herself not to retreat. "You took a risk," Lucien continued quietly. "I could have overruled you, made you look weak, reinforced the idea that you require my permission for everything. Why didn't you? Because you were right, and because I do not punish competence." Something shifted in the air between them. Eveline realized with sudden clarity that she had just passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. Lucien had been watching, measuring, determining whether his purchase had been worth the price, and she had proven her value. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Lucien." She looked up sharply. "What?" "When we are alone, you may call me Lucien. Formality is for audiences. We are past that now." Eveline's pulse quickened despite her best efforts at control. "Then you should call me Eveline." "I know your name." "You have never used it." Lucien's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time since their wedding, she saw something other than calculation. Curiosity, maybe. Or recognition. "Eveline," he said quietly, testing the shape of it, "do not mistake approval for softness. I am still the man who bought you. Nothing has changed except my awareness that you are capable of being useful." How romantic. The corner of his mouth twitched. "You used that line before. Find new material." Then he walked out, leaving Eveline alone with a racing heart and the disturbing realization that somewhere between the chapel and this library, she had started seeing Lucien Blackthorne as something other than her captor. As a partner, maybe. Or worse, as a man. London arrived at Ravenscar in the form of 50 nobles and twice as many servants. Lucien was hosting the Autumn Assembly, an annual gathering where northern lords pretended to drink and celebrate while actually negotiating alliances that would determine Parliament's direction for the next year. Dukes, earls, ministers, and their wives descended on the castle like a beautifully dressed invasion force. Eveline spent 3 days preparing. Mrs. Kane managed logistics while Eveline handled seating arrangements with the precision of a general deploying troops. Every placement mattered. Every conversation would be scrutinized. One wrong pairing could trigger feuds that lasted decades. Sarah helped her dress the night of the main banquet in emerald silk that transformed her from Northern Duchess to London competitor. Jewelry that had belonged to Lucien's grandmother. Hair swept up to expose the throat Lucien had kissed exactly once during their wedding ceremony. She looked like power. She felt like prey. "You are the Duchess of Ravenscar," she whispered to her reflection. "Act like it." The great hall had been transformed into something from a fever dream. Gold everywhere, chandeliers dripping crystal, tables loaded with food that could have fed the village for months. An orchestra playing in the corner while servants moved through crowds like water. Eveline entered on Lucien's arm. Every eye turned, every conversation paused. She had been hidden away for nearly a month. London society was starving for information about the woman who had somehow captured the uncapturable Duke of Ravenscar. Lucien felt her tension and leaned close, his voice barely audible beneath the music. They are wolves. Show fear and they will devour you. Show strength and they will respect you. Show nothing and they will invent stories worse than truth. Which should I choose? Whichever comes naturally. He guided her to the high table where the most powerful lords already waited. Duke Cedric Hollowmere, Lady Patricia Ashcroft, Minister Edward Vale, each one measuring Eveline like an accountant reviewing questionable assets. Dinner began with false pleasantries. Hollowmere raised his glass toward Lucy. A toast to the Duke of Ravenscar and his beautiful bride. May House Blackthorne flourish for generations. Everyone drank. Everyone lied. Eveline could feel the hostility radiating from Lady Ashcroft, whose daughter had been a leading candidate for Lucien's hand before the Whitmore arrangement appeared. The woman's smile was surgical. Tell me, Duchess, how are you finding life at Ravenscar? I imagine the isolation must be quite different from London society. Translation. You are trapped in the north with a man nobody understands. How long before you break? Eveline sipped her wine slowly. I find the isolation refreshing, Lady Ashcroft. London society tends toward performance. Here, people say what they mean. How provincial. How honest. Lucien's hand found Eveline's beneath the table. A brief touch. A warning or encouragement, she couldn't tell which. Minister Vale leaned forward, his politician's smile never reaching his eyes. I hear you intervened in a local dispute recently, Your Grace. Bold move for someone so new to northern politics. I protected a Blackthorne tenant, hardly revolutionary. Unless it sets precedent. Lord Ashford was quite insulted. Lord Ashford should choose better servants. Hollowmere laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. She has spirit, Lucien. I can see the appeal. Lucien's expression remained neutral, but Eveline felt his entire body tighten beside her. The Duchess speaks with my authority. Any insult directed toward her is an insult directed toward me. The table went quiet. Hollowmere raised both hands in mock surrender. No insult intended, old friend. Simply observing that your wife appears to have inherited your particular brand of ruthlessness. A compliment, truly. But his eyes said otherwise. Dinner continued through 7 courses, each one more elaborate than the last. Eveline navigated conversation like walking through a minefield. Every word calculated, every smile weaponized. She was exhausted and exhilarated. This was the world Lucien ruled, not through violence, through precision, through understanding that every interaction was negotiation and every negotiation was war. After dinner, dancing began. Lucien led Eveline onto the floor while the orchestra played something slow and elegant. His hand settled against her waist with the same controlled precision he applied to everything else. You performed well tonight, he murmured. I survived. In this world, they are the same thing. They moved through candlelight while nobles watched from the edges, whispering behind fans and wine glasses. Hollowmere hates you, Eveline observed quietly. Hollowmere hates anyone with more power than him. He has been trying to undermine House Blackthorne for years. Why haven't you destroyed him? Lucien's eyes met hers. Because destroying enemies creates martyrs. Controlling them creates leverage. Hollowmere is more useful alive and desperate than dead and replaced by someone I do not understand. So you keep him close. I keep everyone close. It is the only way to see the knife before it reaches your back. The music swelled around them, and Eveline realized with uncomfortable clarity that she was dancing with a man who trusted absolutely no one, including her. Maybe especially her. What would it take, she asked carefully, for you to trust someone completely? Lucien was silent for 3 full rotations. Then, I watched my father trust completely. I watched him believe in loyalty and love and all the pretty lies people tell themselves. And I watched those beliefs destroy him when the woman he loved betrayed him for a richer man. So you decided trust was weakness. I decided trust was suicide. The song ended. Lucien released her and walked away without another word, leaving Eveline standing in the middle of the dance floor with her heart pounding and her mind racing. She had just glimpsed the wound beneath the armor, and it was deeper than she had imagined. The assembly ended 3 days later with alliances reformed and enemies temporarily pacified. Eveline watched carriages depart from her chamber window, while Sarah packed away the jewelry and gowns that had transformed her into someone London society might actually respect. She was exhausted. 3 nights of performing perfection. 3 days of navigating conversations designed to expose weakness. 3 endless dinners beside Lucien while nobles tested whether the Duke's new wife was asset or liability. She had proven herself. But the victory felt hollow. Because somewhere between the dancing and the political warfare, Eveline had started seeing Lucien Blackthorne not as a captor or even a partner, but as a man carrying damage he would never acknowledge. And damage, she was learning, could be more dangerous than cruelty. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Enter. Lucien stepped inside, still dressed in the formal attire he wore for farewells. He looked tired in a way she had never seen. The mask was slipping. You handled yourself well, he said quietly. Better than I expected. Thank you. He moved to the window, standing beside her in silence while the last carriages disappeared down the hill. My father loved my mother, Lucien said suddenly. Completely, obsessively. He would have burned England to keep her safe. Eveline waited. She left him for Duke Holomere's brother, took half the Blackthorne fortune with her. My father never recovered. He died believing love was real and worth the price. And you decided he was wrong. I decided he was weak. Eveline turned to face him. Or maybe he was just human. Lucien's jaw tightened. Humanity is expensive. I cannot afford it. Yeah. Everyone can afford it. Some people just choose not to pay. His eyes locked onto hers, and for exactly 5 seconds, she saw past the Duke of Ravenscar into the man nobody was allowed to meet. Scared, isolated, convinced that attachment was death. Why are you telling me this? Eveline asked softly. Because you asked what trust would cost. I am showing you the price. Then he turned and walked out, leaving Eveline alone with the terrible realization that she was starting to care about a man who had specifically purchased her to avoid caring about anyone. Winter arrived early that year. Snow buried Ravenscar under white silence while the sea turned black and violent beyond the cliffs. The castle became a fortress against cold that seeped through stone no matter how many fires burned. Eveline spent December learning the final pieces of Lucien's empire. She discovered he owned shipping routes that controlled half of England's northern trade. She learned about investments in railways that were reshaping the country. She found correspondence with Parliament members who owed Lucien favors that could never be repaid. House Blackthorne was not just powerful, it was essential. And Lucien protected that power with the focus of someone who understood exactly how quickly empires could collapse. Christmas arrived without celebration. Eveline woke alone in her chambers to find a single gift beside the fireplace. A leather journal, expensive and unmarked. Inside Lucien's handwriting, for the thoughts you are too smart to share aloud. She sat staring at it for 20 minutes. It was the most personal thing he had ever given her, and the most terrifying, because it meant he saw her, really saw her, not as decoration or obligation, but as someone capable of thoughts dangerous enough to hide. That night, Eveline attended dinner in the Great Hall, wearing burgundy silk and carrying questions she had been avoiding for months. Lucien looked up from his correspondence when she entered. You are early. I wanted to ask you something. He set down his papers. Ask, why did you really marry me? And do not tell me it was strategy. You could have achieved the same goals through contracts and leverage. You did not need a wife. Silence stretched between them. Then Lucien did something completely unexpected. He stood, walked to where Eveline waited, and pulled her chair out personally before sitting back down. You are correct. I did not need a wife. I needed someone who understood that marriage was business. Someone strong enough not to break under the isolation. Someone smart enough to be useful. And when I saw you walk into that chapel without crying or begging or performing tragedy, I realized you were the first person I had met in 20 years who might actually survive being married to me. Evelyn's breath caught. That is not the same as wanting someone. No, Lucien agreed quietly. It is not. Their eyes met across candlelight and distance that felt simultaneously infinite and fragile. Do you regret it? Eveline asked. Regret is for people who believe the past could have been different, ideal in present reality. That is not an answer. Lucien leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost vulnerable. Every night I walk these corridors alone because sleep is dangerous. Every morning I wake expecting betrayal because trust is suicide. Every decision I make is calculated to protect an empire built on my father's corpse. Regret is a luxury I cannot afford. But if you could afford it, he reached across the table, slowly, carefully, and took her hand. His skin was warm. His grip was gentle. His eyes were the most honest she had ever seen them. If I could afford it, Lucien said, I would regret every year I spent believing that being untouchable was the same as being safe. Evelyn's heart stopped, then restarted at twice the speed. She had just heard the Duke of Ravenscar admit vulnerability. And vulnerability, she suddenly understood, was not weakness. It was the only real power anyone ever had. January brought crisis in the form of a letter from London. Eveline found Lucien in his study at midnight, surrounded by correspondence and wearing an expression she had learned to recognize as dangerous. What happened? He looked up. Your sister. Ice flooded Evelyn's chest. Catherine, what about her? Your father is attempting to arrange her marriage to Marquis Thornfield, 63 years old, twice widowed, desperate for an heir. The room tilted. Catherine was 19, brilliant, fragile, everything their father's collapse had not yet destroyed. No, Eveline whispered. Your father has significant debts remaining even after our arrangement. Thornfield is offering to absorb them in exchange for… No. Lucien stood slowly. Eveline, you will stop this. I have no legal authority over your father's decisions regarding… Then buy her. The words exploded out of Eveline before she could stop them. You bought me. Buy Catherine. Pay whatever Thornfield is offering. Double it. I do not care what it costs. But Lucien's expression hardened. You're asking me to interfere in another noble house's internal affairs. That is not how this world works. Then change how it works. Some gut. You have enough power to rewrite any rule you want. Power has limits. Cowardice has limits. The accusation hung between them like a blade. Lucien's eyes went flat. Dangerous. The mask slamming back into place. Be very careful what you call me. But Eveline was past careful. She crossed the study until they were inches apart, staring up at a man who could destroy her with a signature. You told me you protect what belongs to you absolutely. Catherine is my sister, which means she belongs to me, which means she belongs to you. So protect her. That is not… You are terrified. Lucien went completely still. You are terrified, Eveline continued, her voice shaking, that if you admit you care about anything beyond power, you will become your father. You will become weak. You will become human. Stop. But you are already human, Lucien. You are already capable of caring. You just pretend you are not because pretending feels safer than… He kissed her. Hard. Desperate. Furious. It was nothing like their wedding kiss. Nothing like the controlled precision he applied to everything else. This was hunger colliding with fear, need destroying discipline. Eveline kissed him back with equal desperation, her hands fisting in his shirt, her body pressed against his like she could physically force him to feel everything he was trying to deny. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucien's forehead rested against hers. I will handle it, he said roughly. Promise me. I promise. Eveline pulled back just enough to see his face. Why? Lucien's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her lips with unexpected gentleness. Because you are right. Catherine belongs to you, you belong to me, and I have never failed to protect what is mine. He kissed her again, slower this time, and Eveline realized with terrifying clarity that somewhere between the chapel and this study, between strategy and survival, she had stopped being property. She had become something infinitely more dangerous. She had become wanted. The next morning, Lucien left for London. Eveline watched his carriage disappear into snow and distance, her heart torn between hope and dread. 3 days passed, then a week. Finally, a letter arrived. Arrangement terminated. Catherine is safe. Thornfield has been persuaded to seek alternative prospects. Your father has been informed that any future decisions regarding your sister require Blackthorne approval. Return to Ravenscar when winter passes. We have unfinished business. Eveline read the letter 6 times before understanding what it truly said. Lucien Blackthorne, the man who trusted no one, who viewed emotion as weakness, who had built an empire on ruthless control, had just sacrificed political capital and personal leverage to protect a girl he had never met, because Eveline had asked him to. Because somewhere beneath the armor, he was learning to care. And caring, Eveline was discovering, was the most dangerous thing 2 people could do, especially when the world they lived in punished weakness without mercy. She walked to the window overlooking Ravenscar's cliffs, watching waves destroy themselves against rocks that never moved, and wondered whether love could survive in a place built for war, or whether war would destroy them both before they ever had the chance to find out. Lucien returned to Ravenscar on a Thursday, with blood under his fingernails and silence in his carriage. Eveline saw him from the East Tower window, watching the black horses strain against mud and early spring rain. 3 weeks in London had carved something new into his face, harder lines around his mouth, shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, and choices that left permanent marks. She met him in the entrance hall. He stepped through the doorway dripping cold water and exhaustion, and for exactly 2 seconds their eyes met with the kind of recognition that terrified them both. Then the mask returned. "Your sister is safe," Lucien said flatly. "Thornfield accepted alternative compensation. Your father has been made to understand that Catherine's future requires my approval." "What did you do?" "What was necessary?" "That is not an answer. I hate pas." Lucien pulled off his gloves slowly, studying her with eyes that had seen things he would never describe. "Thornfield had business interests in shipping routes I control. He also had a mistress in Brighton whose existence would have destroyed his political ambitions. I offered him a choice. Withdraw from the arrangement with your father, or watch both collapse simultaneously. Blackmail, negotiation." Eveline stepped closer, searching his face for the man who had kissed her in his study 3 weeks ago. The man who had admitted vulnerability felt safer than truth. He was gone, replaced by the Duke of Ravenscar in full armor, every weakness sealed behind stone. "Did you hurt anyone?" Lucien's jaw tightened. "Define hurt." "Did you destroy lives to save my sister?" "I destroyed one man's comfort to save one girl's future." The mathematics seemed favorable. He moved past her toward the stairs, but Eveline caught his arm. His entire body went rigid at the contact. "Lucien, do not mistake what I did for kindness," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 3 weeks spent becoming the monster London expected. "I protected Catherine because she belongs to you and you belong to me. Possession, not mercy. Remember the difference." Then he pulled away and disappeared into the castle's darkness, leaving Eveline standing in the entrance hall with the terrible knowledge that saving one person had cost Lucien whatever small progress he had made toward becoming human. War had reclaimed him, and she had sent him to battle. Spring arrived slowly at Ravenscar, melting snow into mud and filling the castle with cold light that exposed every crack in the stone. Lucien buried himself in work. He rode the estates for hours, managing tenants and investments with mechanical precision. He spent nights in his study reviewing correspondence until dawn broke over the sea. He attended dinners beside Eveline in perfect silence, eating without tasting, listening without hearing. They had not touched since his return, had not kissed, had barely spoken beyond necessary courtesies. Eveline felt him slipping away like water through her fingers, and the loss carved something hollow inside her chest that she refused to name. Sarah noticed first. "Your Grace, forgive me for speaking out of turn, but say it." The girl hesitated, then pressed forward with the bravery of someone who had learned the Duchess did not punish honesty. "His Grace has not slept properly in weeks. The staff is worried." "Worried about what?" "That he is becoming like his father, before the end." Ice flooded Eveline's veins. "What happened to his father?" Sarah looked genuinely surprised. "He never told you." "No." The girl's face went pale. Then I should not. Sarah, tell me. A long silence stretched between them while rain drummed against the windows. Finally, Sarah spoke in a whisper that felt like betrayal. The old Duke loved his wife more than anything. When she left him for another man, he stopped sleeping, stopped eating. The servants found him in the North Tower one morning. He had walked off the edge during a storm. Eveline's breath caught. Suicide. Lucien's father had not died of heartbreak. He had chosen death over a world without the woman he loved. And Lucien had spent 20 years making sure he would never become weak enough to make the same choice. Thank you, Sarah. That will be all. The girl fled, clearly terrified she had revealed too much. Eveline stood alone in her chambers, staring at nothing, understanding finally why Lucien walked the battlements at night. He was not patrolling. He was fighting the same darkness that had consumed his father. And he was losing. Dex. She found him on the North Tower just before midnight. Rain fell in sheets that turned the world into water and shadows. Lucien stood at the edge where stone met empty air, looking down at rocks 200 feet below that had killed his father 20 years ago. Eveline's heart stopped. Step back. He did not move. Lucien, step back from the edge. Slowly, he turned to face her. His hair was soaked. His shirt clung to his body like a second skin, but his eyes were what terrified her. Empty. Completely empty. You should not be here, he said calmly. Neither should you. This is my castle. I go where I please. Eveline moved closer, every instinct screaming at her to run, to call for help, to do anything except approach a man standing at the edge of his own destruction. But running meant losing him, and she had already lost too much. Your father stood here, she said quietly. Lucien's expression cracked for exactly 1 second. Who told you? Gopi. Ipamjika. It does not matter. I know. And I know you have spent 20 years making sure you would never become him, never love anyone enough to be destroyed when they leave. Intelligent strategy. Coward strategy. His hands curled into fists. Careful. You are terrified that caring about me will make you weak, that if I ever left, you would end up exactly where your father ended up. So you are pushing me away before I can hurt you. I am protecting us both. You are destroying us both, Anne. Thunder cracked overhead, and Lucien moved toward her with dangerous speed, backing her against the tower wall with his body. You want honesty? He growled. Fine. Every night I stand here wondering if my father was braver than me. He loved someone completely, and when he lost her, he had the courage to end the pain. I loved no one, needed no one, and I still feel like I am dying. Eveline's hands came up to frame his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. Then stop dying alone and let me in. You do not understand what you are asking. I am asking you to trust me. Trust is suicide, yes. You have said that before. But you are already killing yourself, Lucien, slowly, carefully. You are just too proud to do it quickly, like your father. The words struck him like a physical blow. For several seconds, he just stared at her, rain streaming down his face, his breathing harsh and uneven. Then he kissed her. Not with control, not with precision, with pure, desperate need that felt like drowning and breathing at the same time. Eveline kissed him back with equal ferocity, her fingers tangling in his wet hair, her body pressed against his like she could physically hold him together through will alone. When they finally broke apart, Lucien's forehead rested against hers. If I let you in, he whispered, and you leave, I will not leave. You cannot promise that. Yes, I can. Because I'm not your mother. I'm not looking for something better. I'm looking at you, Lucien, just you. And I'm choosing to stay. His arms came around her then, holding her with the kind of desperate strength that spoke of a man who had been alone too long. They stood together on the tower while rain fell and thunder shook the stones, and somewhere far below, the sea crashed against rocks that had witnessed one duke's death and now held another duke's salvation. Lucien did not say he loved her, but he held her like she was the only thing keeping him from falling. And for now, that was enough. Banpach. The change happened slowly at first. Lucien started sleeping in Eveline's chambers. Not for intimacy, though that came later with the same fierce intensity that marked everything he did, but for presence. for the strange comfort of waking beside someone who did not fear him. He still walked the battlements at night, but now Eveline walked beside him. He still worked until exhaustion claimed him, but now he allowed her into his study to review estate business together. He was learning, painfully, awkwardly, like a wolf being domesticated one careful step at a time. But he was trying. And trying, Eveline discovered, was its own form of courage. Then London sent a letter that changed everything. Eveline found Lucien in the library at dawn, staring at correspondence with an expression she had learned to recognize as dangerous. "What is it?" He looked up slowly. "Your sister is coming to Ravenscar." "Catherine? Why?" "Your father died 3 days ago. Heart failure. She has nowhere else to go." The world tilted sideways. Her father was dead. The man who had sold her like livestock, who had nearly destroyed Catherine through desperation, who had built their entire lives on gambling and failure. Dead. Eveline felt nothing, then everything, then nothing again. Lucien was beside her instantly, his hands on her shoulders, his voice cutting through the shock. "Breathe." She obeyed automatically. "He was a bastard," Lucien said bluntly. "He used you. He would have destroyed Catherine. The world is objectively better without him." "I know." "Then why are you crying?" Eveline touched her face and found it wet. "Because he was still my father, and now he is gone, and I never got to tell him." She stopped. Tell him what? That she hated him? That she forgave him? That she understood desperation could turn good men into monsters? Lucien pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with surprising gentleness. "You do not owe him anything," he murmured. "Not forgiveness, not grief, not even memory. He made his choices. You survived them. That is enough." Eveline pressed her face into his shirt and let herself break for exactly 5 minutes. Then she pulled herself together the way she had been trained since childhood, wiping her eyes and stepping back into the armor every woman learned to wear. "When does Catherine arrive?" "Tomorrow." "Then I have work to do." Lucien caught her hand before she could leave. "Eveline." "Yes?" His eyes held something she had never seen before. Concern. Real concern. "You are allowed to feel this. You do not have to be strong every second." "Yes, I do. Because if I stop being strong, I will fall apart completely, and I cannot afford that luxury any more than you can." Understanding flickered across his face. They were the same, she and Lucien, both forged by parents who had taught them that survival required becoming stone. "Then fall apart with me," he said quietly. "Tonight, when Catherine is settled and the servants are asleep, fall apart in my arms where no one else can see. Let me carry some of this weight." Eveline stared at him, this man who had bought her, controlled her, and somehow learned to love her in the strange, brutal way he loved everything. "Why?" "Because you carried mine when I stood on that tower. Fair is fair." She kissed him then, tasting salt and gratitude and the terrible beauty of being truly seen. "Tonight," she promised. Then she went to prepare rooms for a sister she had not seen in 4 months, and a grief she could not afford to show. Catherine Whitmore arrived at Ravenscar Castle in a hired carriage wearing black mourning silk and carrying everything she owned in 2 small trunks. Eveline met her at the entrance, and for several seconds the sisters just stared at each other. Catherine looked older, thinner, like their father's death had carved away whatever softness remained from their childhood. Then they were holding each other, both crying, both pretending they were not. "I am so sorry," Catherine whispered. "I know you hated him, but I did not hate him. I just finally stopped needing him to be different than he was." They broke apart slowly, and Catherine looked around Ravenscar's entrance hall with wide eyes that took in the grandeur and the coldness in equal measure. "This is where you live now?" "Yes." "It looks like a prison." "It was, for a while." "And now?" Eveline glanced toward the stairs where she knew Lucien was watching from the shadows, giving her space but remaining close enough if she needed him. "Now it is home." Catherine followed her gaze and tensed when she spotted the Duke. Even from a distance, Lucien radiated the kind of controlled power that made people instinctively afraid. "That is your husband." "Yes. He looks terrifying." "He is. But you love him anyway." Eveline turned sharply. What makes you think? Because you are looking at him the way Mother used to look at Father, before everything collapsed. The comparison struck harder than any insult. Their mother had loved their father with desperate devotion that survived gambling, debt, and public humiliation. That kind of love had seemed pathetic when Eveline was younger. Now it seemed prophetic, because she was starting to understand exactly how her mother had felt, watching a man destroy himself while loving him anyway. Come, Eveline said, linking her arm through Catherine's. I will show you to your rooms. You are safe here. I promise. They walked through Ravenscar's corridors while servants moved past like ghosts, and Catherine absorbed the reality of her new life with the same quiet resilience that had allowed her to survive their father's collapse. That night at dinner, Lucien joined them. He sat at the head of the table while the sisters flanked him, and for 20 minutes nobody spoke. Just the sound of silver against china and firelight crackling in the massive hearth. Finally, Catherine broke the silence. Thank you for protecting me from Marquis Thornfield, Your Grace. Lucien looked up, his expression unreadable. You are Eveline's sister. That made you my responsibility. Still, thank you. You are welcome. More silence. Then Catherine, with the reckless bravery of someone who had nothing left to lose. Did you love my father? Eveline choked on her wine. Lucien's eyes narrowed dangerously. No. Then why did you marry my sister? Catherine, Eveline started, but Lucien raised one hand, silencing her with casual authority that still made her pulse quicken despite months of marriage. I married your sister because your father offered her to settle debts. I accepted because I needed coastal properties and political leverage. Love was irrelevant. And now? Now is different. How? Lucien set down his fork with deliberate precision. Now I would burn London to keep her safe. Does that satisfy your curiosity? Catherine smiled for the first time since arriving. Yes, Your Grace. It does. That the rest of dinner passed in easier conversation, and Eveline watched her husband navigate her sister's questions with surprising patience. He was trying. For her. And trying, she was learning, was the most honest form of love. 2 weeks later, the scandal arrived. Eveline was reviewing household accounts when Mrs. Kane appeared in the doorway looking genuinely shaken, a rare state for a woman who had survived 40 years managing Ravenscar's chaos. Your Grace, you need to see this. She handed over a London newspaper still damp from the Morning Post. Eveline read the headline 3 times before understanding penetrated. Duke of Ravenscar's brutality exposed. Thornfield bankrupt, after Blackthorne revenge. The article detailed everything. Lucien's threats, Thornfield's mistress, the systematic destruction of shipping investments and political alliances. It painted the Duke of Ravenscar as a monster who wielded power without mercy, which was accurate. But the article went further, suggesting Lucien had acted not to protect Catherine but to demonstrate dominance, that he was dangerous, unstable, a threat to England's stability. The author was Duke Cedric Hollowmere. Eveline's hands shook with fury. This was retaliation. Hollowmere had been waiting for an opportunity to strike at Lucien, and saving Catherine had provided the perfect ammunition. She found Lucien in his study, already reading the same article. This is my fault, she said immediately. He looked up calmly, too calmly. No, this is politics. Lucien, they are calling you a monster because you protected my sister. They're calling me a monster because I am one. Hollowmere is simply being honest about it. That is not true. Is it not? He stood slowly, moving around the desk with predatory grace. I destroyed Thornfield's life, ruined his finances, exposed his secrets. I did it efficiently and without remorse. That is the definition of monstrous behavior. You did it to save Catherine. I did it because you asked me to. There is a difference. One is noble, one is possession. Eveline stepped closer, refusing to let him retreat behind philosophy and self-loathing. You are not your father. You are not weak for caring about people. I am exactly like my father. I am just better at hiding it. Then stop hiding! The words echoed through the study like gunfire. Lucien's expression hardened into something carved from ice and rage. You want me to stop hiding? Fine. I am obsessed with you, Eveline, completely. I think about you constantly. I plan my days around moments I might touch you. I have murdered men in my mind for looking at you too long at dinners. If you ever left me, I would become exactly what Hollowmere claims I am, a monster without restraint. So forgive me if I prefer to hide that particular truth behind courtesy and control. Eveline's breath caught. It was the most honest thing he had ever said, and the most terrifying. I am not leaving you. You cannot know that. Yes, I can, because I am just as obsessed with you. I wait for you to come to bed at night. I calculate ways to make you smile. I dream about the future we could build, if you would just stop punishing yourself for being human. They stared at each other across the study, two people who had been taught that love was weakness, finally admitting it was the only strength that mattered. This scandal will destroy my reputation, Lucien said quietly. Then we will rebuild it together. Parliament may move against me. Then we will fight them together. Hollowmere wants war. Eveline's eyes hardened with something that matched her husband's ruthlessness. Then we will give him war. Together, shat. Lucien crossed the space between them in 2 strides and kissed her with bruising intensity that tasted like desperation and promise. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. I do not know how to do this, he admitted roughly. I do not know how to love someone without consuming them. Then consume me. But let me consume you back. Equal. Partners. Partners in what? Everything. Something shifted in Lucien's eyes. A decision made, a line crossed. Then we handle Hollowmere together, but we do it my way. Which is? A smile touched his mouth. Sharp, dangerous. The smile of a man who had just decided to stop pretending he was not exactly what London feared. We remind everyone why they should be afraid of House Blackthorne. The Winter Sovereign Ball came 6 weeks later. It was the social event of the season, hosted at Hollowmere's estate outside London. Every noble family in England received invitations. Attendance was mandatory for anyone who wanted to maintain political relevance. Lucien and Eveline arrived fashionably late in a carriage that cost more than most estates. Eveline wore midnight blue silk that moved like water, diamonds at her throat that caught firelight and turned it into weapons. Her hair was swept up to expose the neck Lucien had kissed that morning while promising her exactly what would happen after they survived tonight. She looked like a duchess. She felt like a soldier. Lucien wore black as always, his formal attire perfectly tailored, his expression carved from ice. But his hand at the small of Eveline's back was warm, proprietary, a silent declaration that she belonged to him, and he would destroy anyone who forgot it. They entered Hollowmere's ballroom like conquerors entering enemy territory. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. The scandal had done its work. Everyone knew what Lucien had done to Thornfield. Everyone had read Hollowmere's accusations. Everyone was waiting to see if the Duke of Ravenscar would crumble under public judgment. Instead, he smiled. Cold. Perfect. Absolutely terrifying. Duke Cedric Hollowmere approached with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Blackthorne. How kind of you to attend despite the recent unpleasantness. Lucien's expression never changed. Hollowmere. Lovely party. Though I notice Thornfield is absent. Did his bankruptcy prevent him from affording the travel? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Hollowmere's smile tightened. You mock a man you destroyed? I mock a man who attempted to purchase a child. Thornfield made his choices. I simply ensured he paid for them. By threatening his livelihood, by exposing his private affairs. That is the behavior of a tyrant, not a duke. Eveline stepped forward before Lucien could respond. Lord Hollowmere, forgive my husband's directness. He tends toward honesty when most men prefer comfortable lies. Yes, the Duke of Ravenscar destroyed Marquis Thornfield's finances. He did it because Thornfield was attempting to force my 19-year-old sister into marriage. My husband defended family. If you consider that tyrannical, perhaps you should examine what you consider acceptable. The ballroom went completely silent. Hollowmere's face flushed crimson. You dare? I dare, Eveline continued calmly. Because unlike you, Lord Hollowmere, I do not hide behind political theater when my actions can stand on their own merit. You wrote that article because you are afraid. The Duke of Ravenscar has more power than you will ever possess, and instead of earning comparable influence, you attempt to tear him down through gossip and scandal. It is pathetic. Someone in the crowd actually laughed. Shpachas. Someone in the crowd. Hollowmere looked like he wanted to strangle her. Your Grace, you forget yourself. Lucian's hand moved to Eveline's waist, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. She speaks with my complete authority. Any insult directed toward the Duchess of Ravenscar is an insult directed toward me, and I do not accept insults well. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Hollowmere opened his mouth to respond, then seemed to realize he was standing in a ballroom full of witnesses who would remember this moment forever. He had been publicly humiliated by a woman, defended by the very monster he had tried to expose, and now everyone was watching to see what he would do. Finally, he bowed stiffly. My apologies, Your Grace. I meant no disrespect. It was surrender disguised as courtesy. Lucian smiled. Of course you did not. Enjoy your party, Hollowmere. We certainly will. Then he guided Eveline away, leaving Hollowmere standing alone while whispers spread through the ballroom like wildfire. The Duchess of Ravenscar had just won a public battle against one of England's most powerful dukes, and she had done it without raising her voice. They danced together while the orchestra played and nobles watched with fascination and fear. Lucien's hand was firm against Eveline's waist, his eyes locked on hers with intensity that made breathing difficult. That was reckless, he murmured. That was necessary. You made an enemy tonight. We already had an enemy. I just made sure he knows we are not afraid of him. Lucian spun her through candlelight, his expression shifting into something that looked dangerously close to pride. You are extraordinary. I am your wife. There is a difference. No, there is not. The music swelled around them, and Eveline realized with sudden clarity that this was the moment everything changed. They were no longer captor and captive, no longer transaction and obligation. They were partners, equals. Two people who had learned to fight side by side in a world that demanded perfection and punished weakness. And together, they were unstoppable. The ball continued for 3 more hours, but the real victory had already been claimed. By the time Lucian and Eveline left Hollowmere's estate, half of London's nobility had approached them with quiet words of support. Politicians who had been neutral suddenly found reasons to align with House Blackthorne. Families who had questioned Lucian's methods now saw strength where they had previously seen cruelty. The scandal had backfired spectacularly, and Hollowmere knew it. They returned to Ravenscar 2 days later to find Catherine waiting with a letter. This arrived this morning, she said, handing it to Eveline. It is addressed to you, but the seal is from Hollowmere's estate. Eveline broke the wax and read quickly, then read again, slower, making sure she understood. Lucien watched her face. What does it say? She looked up, her expression caught between shock and fury. Hollowmere is demanding a formal duel. He claims you insulted his honor at the ball. I did insult his honor. He earned it. Lucien, dueling is illegal. If you accept... If I refuse, I look weak. Hollowmere knows that. This is his final move. Either I accept and risk death or imprisonment, or I decline and destroy my reputation permanently. Catherine's face went pale. You cannot be serious. He is trying to kill you. He is trying to remove me from the board entirely. Dead or disgraced, the result is the same. Eveline's hands trembled as she set down the letter. Then we find another option. There is no other option. There is always another option. Lucien crossed to her, his hands framing her face with surprising gentleness, despite the violence they were discussing. I have spent my entire life preparing for this moment. Every lesson, every battle, every enemy I destroyed, it all led here, to a choice between my pride and my life. Choose life, Eveline whispered desperately. Choose us. I am choosing us by making sure Hollowmere can never threaten you again. Not like this. Please, Lucien, not like this. He kissed her forehead, his lips lingering for several heartbeats. I love you, he said quietly. 3 words he had never spoken. 3 words that changed everything. I love you enough to make sure you survive what comes next, even if I do not." Then he pulled away and walked toward his study to write his acceptance, leaving Eveline standing in the corridor with her world collapsing and the terrible understanding that loving someone meant watching them walk into danger while being powerless to stop them. Catherine moved beside her, gripping her hand tightly. "What do we do?" Eveline stared at the closed study door, her mind racing through possibilities and finding nothing but dead ends. Hollowmere had trapped them perfectly. If Lucien fought, he could die. If he refused, House Blackthorne would crumble. There was no winning scenario. Unless an idea formed, dangerous, desperate. The kind of strategy Lucien himself would use if their positions were reversed. Eveline turned to her sister, her expression hardening into something that finally matched the ruthlessness she had learned from her husband. "We do what Blackthorns do best," she said quietly. "We change the rules of the game." Catherine's eyes widened. "How?" Eveline's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "By making sure Hollowmere regrets ever threatening my family." Eveline spent the first night after Hollowmere's challenge locked in the castle library, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence that mapped the intricate web of London's power structure. Catherine brought her tea at midnight. "You have not slept. Sleep is a luxury we cannot afford." The younger woman sat across from her sister, studying Eveline's face with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read danger in silence. "What are you looking for?" Eveline did not look up from the shipping manifest she was cross-referencing with investment records. "Hollowmere has been planning this for months, maybe years. Men like him do not issue dueling challenges on impulse. They build traps carefully, which means somewhere in all of this, there is a weakness we can exploit. And if there is not?" Now Eveline looked up, her eyes carrying the same cold calculation that had made Lucien Blackthorne the most feared man in England. "Then we create one." Catherine's breath caught. "You sound like him." "Good. That means I am learning." For 3 hours they worked in silence, pulling apart Hollowmere's financial empire piece by piece, his investments, his debts, his alliances. Every connection mapped like a battlefield where one wrong move could trigger complete collapse. Dawn was breaking over Ravenscar's cliffs when Eveline finally found it. A single transaction buried in correspondence from 2 years ago. A loan Hollowmere had taken from a French bank to cover gambling debts. The terms were brutal, the interest was illegal, and if the debt was called due immediately, Hollowmere's entire estate would fold within weeks. The loan had been personally guaranteed by someone with deep connections to both French banking and English nobility, someone who had disappeared from public records 6 months ago. Eveline's hands trembled as she traced the signature at the bottom of the contract. Lady Marguerite Ashford, Lucien's mother. The woman who had destroyed his father. The woman who had taken half the Blackthorne fortune and vanished into Europe with Hollowmere's brother. She was still alive, and she was still destroying people Lucien loved. Catherine leaned over her shoulder, reading the document with growing horror. Dear God, she helped finance Hollowmere's rise. She has been working against House Blackthorne for decades. Not just working against, planning. This entire scandal was designed to force Lucien into a position where he would either die in a duel or lose everything refusing it. Marguerite wants revenge for whatever happened between her and the old Duke, and she is using Hollowmere to deliver it. We have to tell Lucien. Eveline stared at the signature, her mind calculating faster than her heart could process. If she told Lucien his mother was orchestrating his destruction, it would break something inside him that was barely held together. The man who had spent 20 years hardening himself against vulnerability would discover that the original wound had never healed, that his mother's betrayal was not finished. But if she did not tell him, he would walk into that duel blind, and he would die. Not yet, Eveline said quietly. What? We do not tell him yet, not until I know whether this information can save him or destroy him further. Catherine grabbed her arm. Eveline, you cannot keep this from him. He deserves to know. He deserves to survive. And right now, the truth might kill him faster than Hollowmere's bullet. The sisters stared at each other across truth that felt like treason. Finally, Catherine pulled back, her expression caught between loyalty and fear. What are you going to do? Eveline folded the document carefully and locked it in the desk drawer where Lucien kept his most dangerous secrets. I'm going to find Lady Marguerite Ashford, and I am going to make her regret ever teaching her son that love was weakness. Ishas. Lucien found her in the armory at dawn, examining dueling pistols with the focus of someone preparing for war. He stopped in the doorway, watching his wife handle weapons she should never have learned to recognize. "You should not be here." Ski. Eveline did not look up. "These are the pistols your father used before he died. Are they also the ones you will use against Hollowmere?" "Yes." "Then I should be here. Someone needs to make sure they are properly maintained." Lucien crossed the stone floor slowly, his boots echoing in the empty space. When he reached her, he took the pistol from her hands and set it down with deliberate care. "You are not responsible for keeping me alive, Eveline." "Yes, I am. That is what marriage means." "Marriage means you manage the household and produce heirs, not prepare your husband for duels." She turned on him with fury that had been building for 2 days. "Do not reduce me to decoration. Not now. Not after everything." "I am not reducing you. I am protecting you from watching me die." "You arrogant bastard! You think I need protection from reality?" "I watched my father gamble away our future. I was sold like livestock to settle his debts. I survived being married to a man who bought me without caring whether I lived or died. And now you think I cannot handle watching you fight for your life?" Lucien's jaw tightened. "That is different." "How?" "Because I care whether you suffer." The words exploded out of him with more violence than any physical blow. They stood facing each other in the armory, while early light cut through narrow windows and threw shadows across weapons designed for killing. Eveline's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Then do not make me suffer by dying stupidly. Fight Hollowmere, win. Come back to me. And if I cannot win, then you cheat, you lie, you break every rule of honorable combat, because honor means nothing if you are dead and I am left alone in this castle wondering how I am supposed to survive without you." Lucien pulled her against him with desperate strength, his face buried in her hair, his breathing harsh and uneven. "I am terrified," he admitted roughly, "not of dying, of leaving you unprotected in a world that will devour you the moment I am gone." Eveline's arms came around him, holding him with equal desperation. "Then teach me to be as ruthless as you. Give me every weapon you possess. Make me strong enough that London will fear the Duchess of Ravenscar as much as they feared the Duke." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. "You want to become like me? I want to become your equal in every way that matters." Something shifted in Lucien's eyes, a decision made, a line crossed. "Then we start now." For 2 days, Lucien taught Eveline everything. He showed her the ledgers that tracked debts owed to House Blackthorne, the letters that contained blackmail material on half of Parliament, the investment strategies that had built an empire on other men's failures. He explained how to identify weakness in political opponents, how to weaponize information without revealing sources, how to destroy reputations so thoroughly that victims never recovered. He was transforming her from duchess into predator, and Eveline absorbed everything with the hunger of someone who had finally found her purpose. On the second night, they stood together in his study while rain battered the windows, and Lucien pulled out a locked box from beneath his desk. Inside were documents that could topple governments. "These are my final weapons," he said quietly. "If I die in that duel, you use them. Hollowmere has allies in Parliament who will move against Ravenscar immediately. These documents prove corruption, treason, and crimes that would see them executed. You threaten exposure. You negotiate survival. You do whatever necessary to protect Catherine and yourself." Eveline stared at the papers with growing understanding. This was his legacy, not land or money or titles. The ability to survive through information and fear. "I will not need them," she said, "because you are going to win." Lucien's hand came up to cup her face. "And if I do not? Then I will destroy Hollowmere so completely that historians will use his collapse as a lesson in what happens when you threaten House Blackthorne." He kissed her then, slow and deep, tasting like goodbye disguised as promise. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. "I love you," he said. "I wish I had been brave enough to say it sooner." "You are saying it now. That is enough." They made love that night with desperate intensity, both pretending it was not the last time, both knowing it might be. And when dawn came, Lucien dressed in black while Eveline watched from their bed, memorizing every detail of the man who had bought her and somehow learned to love her anyway. "Do not follow me to the dueling grounds," he said quietly. "I need to know you are safe here." "I will not promise that." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "I did not think you would." Then he walked out, and Eveline was left alone with the terrible knowledge that she had information that could save him and no time left to use it. Two tracts. The dueling grounds were located in a clearing 20 miles north of London, far enough from civilization that witnesses could claim ignorance if authorities investigated. Lucien arrived at dawn in a carriage that carried only his second, Lord Marcus Ashford, one of the few nobles who still maintained loyalty to House Blackthorne despite the scandal. Hollowmere was already waiting with his own second and a doctor whose presence was required by dueling tradition, despite being completely useless if either man was killed. The morning was cold, gray, the kind of weather that made violence feel inevitable. Lucien stepped out of the carriage and immediately felt wrongness settle over him like poison. Too many men, too many carriages, too many witnesses for what should have been a private matter of honor. Hollowmere smiled when he saw Lucien's expression. "I invited guests, Blackthorne. I thought England should witness what happens when tyrants are finally held accountable." 20 nobles stood at the clearing's edge, watching with the careful attention of people who had bet money on the outcome. This was not a duel. This was an execution disguised as honor. Lord Ashford moved close to Lucien, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This is wrong. We should leave. If I leave, I am ruined. If you stay, you are dead. Look at Hollowmere's pistol. The barrel is marked. He has been practicing for weeks." Lucien Deaton studied his opponent across 30 feet of dead grass and cold morning air. Hollowmere looked confident, too confident, like a man who knew the game was already won. "You are right," Lucien said quietly. "This is not about honor. This is about removing me permanently." "Then we leave, now, before—" A new carriage appeared at the clearing's edge. Black, expensive, flying no family colors. Everyone turned to watch as the door opened and a woman stepped out wearing traveling clothes and carrying herself with the kind of aristocratic grace that money alone could never purchase. She was perhaps 60 years old, beautiful in the way predators were beautiful, sharp edges disguised as elegance. Lucien's entire body went rigid. He knew that face, had spent 20 years trying to forget it. Lady Marguerite Ashford walked toward the dueling grounds like she owned them, her eyes locked on her son with expression that mixed triumph and contempt in equal measure. "Hello, Lucien, darling. I hear you have been busy destroying people in my absence. How delightfully predictable." Lucien could not breathe. His mother, the woman who had betrayed his father, the woman who had taken everything and disappeared into Europe while the old Duke walked off a tower. She was here, watching, orchestrating. Hollowmere moved to stand beside Marguerite, and suddenly everything made terrible sense. "You," Lucien said, his voice hollow. "You planned all of this." Marguerite smiled. "Of course I did. Did you really think that pathetic scandal was Cedric's idea? The man barely has enough intelligence to dress himself." "No, darling. I have been watching you for years, waiting for the perfect moment to remind you that power is temporary, that love is weakness, that you are your father's son no matter how hard you try to be different. Why? Because you exist. Because every time I hear the Blackthorne name, I am reminded of the prison your father tried to build around me. He loved me, you see, obsessively, desperately, and that love became a cage I had to destroy to survive. So I left. I took his money. I took his dignity. And I left him broken." Lucien's hands curled into fists. "He died because of you. He died because he was weak, and now you will die because you made the same mistake. You fell in love with that little girl your father-in-law sold you. How touching, how pathetic, and how perfectly predictable." She turned to Hollowmere. "Kill him, quickly. I have a ship waiting in Dover." The words hung in cold morning air like a death sentence. Lucien looked around the clearing, calculating odds and finding nothing but failure. Hollowmere had practiced. His mother had planned. The witnesses were all allies who would claim the duel was conducted fairly. He was going to die. and Eveline was going to be left alone with monsters who would devour her the moment his protection vanished. Lord Ashford gripped his arm. Lucien, we need to... The gunshot came from the tree line, not from Hollowmere. From behind. Lord Ashford collapsed with a hole in his chest, blood spreading across expensive wool faster than physics should allow. Chaos erupted. Witnesses screamed. Hollowmere dove for cover. Marguerite laughed, actually laughed, while her son's second bled out on dead grass. Lucien spun toward the trees, reaching for the pistol at his belt. But 3 men emerged from the woods carrying rifles and wearing no identifying colors. Mercenaries. His mother had hired mercenaries. This was not a duel. It was an assassination. One of the men raised his rifle toward Lucien, and time seemed to slow in the way it did before death arrived. Lucien thought of Eveline, of her face when she told him not to die stupidly, of her voice when she promised to destroy Hollowmere if he fell. He thought of his father standing on that tower, choosing death over a world without the woman he loved. And he finally understood. His father had not been weak. His father had been devastatingly, terrifyingly strong. Strong enough to love completely, despite knowing it could destroy him. Strong enough to choose vulnerability over survival. Lucien had spent 20 years being afraid of that strength. And now, in his final seconds, he wished desperately he had been brave enough to embrace it sooner. The rifle fired. Tatanchak. Eveline heard the gunshot from 3 miles away. She had followed Lucien despite his orders, riding hard with Catherine beside her, both women dressed in traveling clothes and carrying weapons they barely knew how to use. The sound echoed through morning cold like the world cracking open. Catherine pulled her horse to a stop, her face pale. That was not 1 shot, that was 3, she said. Eveline dug her heels into her mount, racing toward the clearing with her heart trying to destroy itself inside her chest. Please, please let him be alive. Please let me reach him in time. Please! She burst through the tree line and saw carnage. Lord Ashford dead on the ground, witnesses scattering in panic, Hollowmere hiding behind his carriage, and Lucien on his knees with blood spreading across his shoulder, one of the mercenaries standing over him with a rifle pointed at his head. Eveline did not think. She drew the pistol Lucien had given her 2 days ago and fired. The mercenary collapsed. Everyone turned to stare at the Duchess of Ravenscar sitting on a horse with smoke rising from her weapon and murder in her eyes. Anyone else? She asked calmly. Silence. Marguerite stepped forward, her expression shifting from triumph to shock to something that almost resembled respect. Well, perhaps my son chose better than I thought. Eveline dismounted without taking her eyes off the woman who had orchestrated this massacre. You must be Lady Marguerite. I have heard so much about you. And you must be the girl who thought she could survive loving a Blackthorne. How is that working out? Eveline crossed the clearing slowly, stepping over bodies without looking down. Better than you surviving the scandal I am about to unleash. Marguerite's smile faltered. Excuse me? I found the loan documents, the ones connecting you to French banks and Hollowmere's finances. The ones that prove you helped fund his entire rise to power using money you stole from the Blackthorne estate. I also found correspondence between you and certain French ministers who would be very interested to know you have been selling English military secrets for the past decade. The color drained from Marguerite's face. You are bluffing. Try me. I have copies of everything locked in 3 separate locations. If anything happens to my husband or me, those documents will be delivered to Parliament, the French government, and every newspaper in London simultaneously. Your life ends. Hollowmere's life ends. And everyone you have ever manipulated goes down with you. Marguerite stared at her, calculating odds and finding nothing but checkmate. You cannot prove treason. I do not need to prove it. I just need to suggest it loudly enough that investigations begin. And once they start looking, they will find everything. Because you were arrogant enough to document your crimes. Because you believed you were untouchable. Because you underestimated what a woman would do to protect the man she loves. Silence stretched across the clearing. Then Marguerite laughed, sharp, bitter, the sound of a predator recognizing another predator. You really are remarkable. I can see why Lucien chose you. He did not choose me. I was sold to him. But I chose him back, and that is what you will never understand. Love is not weakness when it makes you willing to become a monster to protect it. Marguerite looked at her son, still kneeling in the grass with blood soaking through his coat. For exactly 3 seconds, something that might have been regret flickered across her face. Then it vanished behind aristocratic coldness. What do you want? I want you gone. Permanently. Leave England tonight. Never contact Lucien again. Never threaten House Blackthorne. Disappear so completely that history forgets you existed. And if I refuse, then I release everything, and you die in a prison cell after watching your life's work collapse. Marguerite studied her in silence. Then she turned to Hollowmere, who was still hiding behind his carriage like a coward. Cedric, darling, it appears we have lost this particular game. How unfortunate. She walked back to her carriage without another word, leaving Hollowmere standing alone with witnesses who had just watched his conspiracy unravel. The man looked around desperately, finding no allies, no escape, no path forward except complete ruin. This is not over, Blackthorne. Lucien finally spoke, his voice rough with pain and fury. Yes, it is. You conspired to murder me using foreign mercenaries on English soil. That is treason. And unlike my wife, I have no interest in letting you disappear quietly. Catherine had dismounted and now stood beside Eveline with a pistol of her own, pointed steady at Hollowmere. My sister offered your mother mercy. I am offering you justice. Choose quickly. What? Hollowmere looked at the 2 women flanking the Duke of Ravenscar and saw his future written in their expressions. Exile or execution. Those were his only options. I will leave England by week's end. You will leave by nightfall, Eveline corrected coldly, and you will sign over every property you own to a trust that will compensate Lord Ashford's family for your crimes. Do this, and you live. Refuse, and my husband will ensure you hang for treason. Hollowmere nodded once, defeated. Then he ran. Literally ran to his carriage like a dog beaten into submission. The remaining witnesses scattered, wanting no part of whatever came next. And suddenly, the clearing was empty except for bodies and blood, and 3 people who had just survived something that should have destroyed them. Catherine rushed to Lucien, examining his shoulder wound with shaking hands. It went straight through. You need a doctor. I need whiskey and bandages. Doctors ask too many questions. Eveline knelt beside her husband, her hands replacing Catherine's, her touch gentle, despite the violence still humming through her veins. You are an idiot. I am aware. You almost died. I noticed. And you scared me more than I have ever been scared in my entire life. Lucien's good hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. You saved me. I protected what belongs to me. There is a difference. A smile touched his mouth despite the pain. Now you sound like me. Good. That means you taught me well. They stayed kneeling together in blood and morning light, while Catherine watched with expression caught between horror and awe. Finally, Eveline stood, helping Lucien to his feet with strength that should not have existed in her small frame. We need to leave before authorities arrive asking questions we cannot answer. Agreed. They walked toward the horses together, 3 people who had entered this clearing as victims and were leaving as survivors. But survival, Eveline was learning, came with costs that could never be fully calculated. She had killed a man today. She had threatened another with destruction. She had become exactly what Lucien had spent 2 days teaching her to become, a predator. And predators, she suddenly understood, could never return to being prey. They reached Ravenscar Castle 3 days later. Lucien's shoulder was healing slowly, kept clean by Catherine's surprisingly competent medical skills and his own stubborn refusal to show weakness. But something else had broken during that duel, something that could not be bandaged. Eveline felt it the moment they crossed into Blackthorne territory. A shift in the air, a change in the way servants looked at them. Word had spread about what happened in that clearing, about the Duchess who had killed to protect her husband, about the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed House Blackthorne. They were no longer just feared, they were legendary. And legends, Eveline was discovering, carried weight that crushed everything soft inside you. That first night back, she stood in their chambers staring at her hands. These hands had held a pistol, had pulled a trigger, had ended a life. She should feel guilty, should feel horror, should feel anything except the cold satisfaction that still hummed beneath her skin. But she felt nothing. Just the stark understanding that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. Lucien found her at midnight, moving through the room with careful precision despite his injury. "You have not slept." "Neither have you." He stood beside her at the window, both of them looking out at darkness that seemed deeper than usual. "Do you regret it?" Lucien asked quietly. "What you did? Do you regret the people you have destroyed?" "That is not an answer." Eveline turned to face him, and he saw something in her eyes that had not existed before that clearing. Recognition. Understanding. The terrible knowledge of what survival actually cost. "No," she said. "I do not regret it. I would do it again. I would kill 100 men to keep you alive, and that terrifies me more than anything else." Lucien pulled her against him with his good arm, holding her while she finally let herself break. "I killed someone," she whispered into his chest. "I killed someone, and I feel nothing except relief that it was not you." That is what love does. It makes monsters of us all. Is that what we are now? Monsters? Ashan. He pulled back just enough to look at her face. "No. We are survivors, and survival requires becoming something harder than what we were. Something stronger. Something capable of protecting what matters most, even when protection means violence." Eveline understood then what Lucien had been trying to tell her from the beginning. Power was not about dominance. It was about being willing to become whatever was necessary to protect the people you loved, even if that meant losing pieces of yourself in the process. "Your mother said love was weakness. My mother was wrong. Love is the most dangerous weapon that exists because it makes you willing to destroy anything that threatens it." They stood together in darkness while Ravenscar Castle settled around them, and Eveline finally accepted the truth she had been avoiding for months. She was no longer the girl who had been sold to settle her father's debts. She was the Duchess of Ravenscar. And the Duchess of Ravenscar protected her family with the same ruthless precision her husband used to protect his empire. 3 weeks after the duel, a letter arrived from Dover. Marguerite Ashford was dead. Heart failure on a ship bound for France. Natural causes according to the ship's doctor. Nothing suspicious except the timing. Lucien read the letter twice before handing it to Eveline without comment. She scanned the words and felt nothing except grim satisfaction. "Do you think it was natural? Does it matter?" "I suppose not." They never discussed it again, but both of them knew the truth. Marguerite Ashford had died because her son had finally stopped being afraid of her, had finally accepted that some wounds could only heal after the person who caused them was gone. It was not murder. It was closure. And closure, Eveline was learning, sometimes required permanent solutions to permanent problems. Summer came to Ravenscar with unusual warmth. The castle that had felt like a prison 6 months ago now felt like a fortress they had built together through blood and survival. Catherine stayed, taking over management of the estate's charitable foundations and proving herself surprisingly competent at navigating noble politics. She had learned from watching her sister, had seen what happened when women accepted helplessness as destiny, and she had chosen strength instead. The three of them, Lucien, Eveline, and Catherine, formed a united front that London society quickly learned not to challenge. House Blackthorne was stronger than ever. But strength, Eveline discovered, came with isolation. Other nobles kept their distance. Political allies offered support but never friendship. They were respected, feared, obeyed, but never truly accepted, because people who survived by becoming monsters rarely got invited to normal lives afterward. One evening, Eveline stood on the battlements watching sunset paint the sea in shades of blood and gold. Lucien joined her, his shoulder finally healed enough that he moved without pain. "Regrets?" he asked. She thought about the question carefully. Did she regret killing to protect him? No. Did she regret threatening his mother into exile? No. Did she regret becoming exactly the kind of woman London society feared? No. But she did regret the cost, the softness she had lost, the innocence that could never be reclaimed, the girl she had been before understanding what survival actually required. "I regret," she said slowly, "that we had to become this to survive, but I do not regret surviving." Lucien's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing with practiced ease. "We are not monsters, Eveline. We are just people who refuse to let the world destroy us. Is there a difference? He pulled her against him, his chin resting on top of her head, while they watched darkness claim the sky. I used to think there was not, but you taught me otherwise. Monsters destroy without purpose. We destroyed to protect. That makes us human, flawed, damaged, but human. Eveline turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had bought her and somehow learned to love her despite believing love was suicide. Do you still think trust is weakness? No. I think trust is terrifying, but I also think it is the only thing that makes surviving worthwhile. He kissed her then, gentle and deep, tasting like redemption and acceptance and the strange, brutal beauty of loving someone enough to become a monster to protect them. When they broke apart, Eveline rested her forehead against his chest, listening to his heartbeat and understanding finally what her mother had known all along. Love was not gentle. Love was war. And war required soldiers willing to fight, even when the cost was their own humanity. Oik. 3 months later, Eveline stood in front of a mirror wearing a gown that barely fit anymore. Catherine noticed immediately. You are pregnant. It was not a question. Eveline's hand moved to her stomach, feeling the small swell that had appeared over the past weeks. Yes. Does Lucien know? Not yet. Catherine stepped beside her sister, studying their reflections with the careful attention of someone cataloging change. You look terrified. I am. Because of what you became? Eveline met her sister's eyes in the mirror. Because I do not know if someone who killed to survive can teach a child how to live. You are not a killer, Eveline. You are a mother protecting her family. There is a difference. Is there? I pulled that trigger without hesitation. I threatened Marguerite with destruction without blinking. I have become everything Lucien spent years teaching me to become. And now I am supposed to raise a child in this world? Teach them right from wrong when I barely remember the difference anymore? Catherine's hand covered Eveline's, squeezing gently. You remember, you just learned that sometimes right and wrong are more complicated than we are taught as children. You learned that protecting the people you love requires making choices that are not clean or easy. You learned that survival is messy, but you also learned that love is worth fighting for, that family is worth protecting, that strength is not the same as cruelty. Eveline stared at her reflection, seeing a woman she barely recognized, harder than the girl who had entered that chapel 6 months ago, sharper, more dangerous, but also more alive. I killed someone, Catherine. I will carry that for the rest of my life. Yes, you will. And you will teach your child that sometimes the world forces impossible choices. That sometimes protecting the people you love means becoming something you never wanted to be. And that is not weakness. That is the cost of survival. Eveline's hand moved to her stomach again, feeling the life growing inside her. This child would be born into House Blackthorne, would inherit all the power and danger and brutal necessity that came with that name, would learn from parents who had survived by becoming monsters when survival required it. And somehow, despite everything, that felt right. Because monsters, she had learned, were just people who refused to let the world destroy them. And that was a lesson worth teaching. But, she told Lucien that night. They were in his study, reviewing estate business, when Eveline set down her pen and spoke the words that would change everything. I am pregnant. Lucien went completely still. For several seconds, he just stared at her, his expression cycling through shock and fear, and something that looked dangerously close to hope. You are certain? Yes. He stood slowly, crossing to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye level. His hands moved to her stomach, resting there with reverence that seemed impossible from a man who had killed without remorse. A child. Yes. Our child. Yes. Lucien's forehead dropped to rest against her stomach, and Eveline felt his shoulders shake with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. I do not know how to be a father. You did not know how to be a husband either. You learned it. What if I destroy them the way my father destroyed me? Eveline's hands framed his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. You will not, because you know what that destruction looks like, because you have spent your entire life learning to be different, because you have me to to stop you if you forget. And if we are both wrong, if we raise a child to survive the way we survived and turn them into something terrible, then we will love them anyway. The way we love each other, not despite the damage, because of it. Lucien pulled her down to the floor with him, holding her with desperate strength while reality settled over both of them. They were going to be parents. Two people who had barely learned to love each other were going to raise a child in a world that had tried to destroy them both. It was terrifying and perfect, and the most honest thing either of them had ever done. Spring came to Ravenscar with violence disguised as beauty. Eveline woke to blood soaking through her nightgown and pain tearing through her body with enough force to steal her breath. 6 months pregnant. Too early. Too dangerous. She tried to call for Lucien but could not form words past the agony consuming her from the inside out. Catherine found her minutes later, sprawled across the floor beside their bed, with her hands pressed against her stomach like she could physically hold their child inside through will alone. The younger woman screamed for help. Servants appeared. The doctor was summoned. Lucien materialized from wherever he had been working, his face draining of color when he saw his wife bleeding across marble floors. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands replacing hers, his voice cutting through panic with the same controlled precision he used to dismantle enemies. "Stay with me. Do you understand? You stay with me." Eveline tried to focus on his face, but the world kept tilting sideways, dragging her down into darkness that felt warm and inviting compared to the pain. "The baby will survive. You both will survive. I am not allowing any other outcome." The doctor arrived and began issuing orders Eveline could not process. Too much movement, too many hands, too much blood spreading across floors that had witnessed generations of Blackthorne violence, but never this particular kind of devastation. Lucien held her through all of it, his voice a steady anchor while her body tried to destroy itself. "You are stronger than this. You killed to protect me. You survived my mother's conspiracy. You will survive this." But survival, Eveline was discovering, was not always a choice you could make through willpower alone. Sometimes the body decided for you, and her body was choosing death. She woke 3 days later in a bedroom that smelled like blood and medicinal herbs. Lucien sat beside the bed, his hand wrapped around hers, his face carved from exhaustion and something that looked dangerously close to devastation. "You are awake." Eveline's voice came out as a whisper. "The baby. Alive, barely. The doctor says the next week will determine whether—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Eveline's free hand moved to her stomach, feeling the small swell that had not disappeared. Still pregnant. Still carrying life that refused to surrender despite every biological instinct screaming otherwise. "What happened?" "You were bleeding internally, something the doctor called placental separation. He performed surgery to repair the damage while you were unconscious." "And if it happens again?" Lucien's expression hardened. "Then we will deal with it, together." But Eveline saw the truth beneath his words. If it happened again, she would die. And their child would die. And Lucien would become exactly what his mother had predicted, a man destroyed by loving someone completely. "You need to prepare," she said quietly. "For what?" "For the possibility that I do not survive this." His grip on her hand tightened until bones ground together. "No." "Lucien, I said no. You do not get to prepare me for your death. You do not get to make this easier. You fight. You survive. Those are your only options. That is not how biology works. Then biology can go to hell. I'm not losing you." The desperation in his voice was raw enough to draw blood. Eveline had seen Lucien face enemies without flinching, had watched him destroy careers and reputations with surgical precision, had witnessed him stand against his own mother without breaking. But the possibility of losing his wife and child was unmaking him in ways violence never could. "If something happens to me," she continued carefully, "Catherine will need protection. The estates will need management. Our child will have both parents. Stop planning your funeral and start planning your recovery." He stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal looking for something to destroy. "I have spent my entire life controlling outcomes through strategy and force. I have bent England to my will through fear and leverage. I have survived everything this world threw at me by refusing to accept defeat. And now you are asking me to prepare for an outcome I cannot control? To accept that you might die while I watch helplessly? I am asking you to be realistic. Lucien spun toward her, his eyes blazing with fury and terror in equal measure. Realistic is for people who accept limitations. I do not accept limitations. You will survive because I am not capable of existing in a world without you. Do you understand? You have become essential, necessary. The only thing that makes this empire worth protecting. So you will fight, and you will win, because the alternative is unacceptable. Eveline stared at her husband, this man who had built walls around his heart for 20 years, now completely exposed and bleeding from wounds he could not control. I love you, she said simply. Then love. Let's start by missing. Okay. The week that followed was the longest of Lucien's life. He did not sleep, did not leave Eveline's side except when the doctor forced him out to examine her, did not eat unless Catherine physically brought him food and watched until he swallowed. He read correspondence beside her bed, managing the empire from a chair, while his wife drifted in and out of consciousness. Every time she woke, his hand found hers immediately. Every time she slept, he watched her breathe like he could keep her alive through observation alone. On the 5th day, Catherine found him staring out the window at dawn, breaking over cliffs he had walked 1,000 times. You need to rest. I need her to survive. Those are not mutually exclusive. Lucien's jaw tightened. If I sleep, she might die while I am unconscious. That is unacceptable. Catherine moved to stand beside him, studying the brother-in-law she had initially feared and now understood better than most. You cannot control this, Lucien. No amount of vigilance will change her outcome. Then what good am I? The question hung in morning light like an admission of defeat. Catherine's hand settled on his arm. You are the reason she is fighting. Every time she wakes up, she looks for you first. Every time the pain gets bad, she reaches for your hand. You are not useless. You are essential. But you need to trust that she is strong enough to survive without you hovering over her like death himself. She is strong enough to survive anything. I am the one who is weak. Because you love her. Because I cannot exist without her, Mutt. Catherine squeezed his arm gently. That is not weakness, Lucien. And that is what makes you human. And maybe, after everything you have survived, being human is exactly what you need to be. He looked at his sister-in-law with expression that mixed gratitude and despair. What if being human is not enough? What if I lose her anyway? Then you will do what Blackthorns do. You will survive. You will protect your child. You will honor her memory by becoming the man she believed you could be. I do not want to become that man without her. I know, but if it comes to that, you will, because she would expect nothing less. They stood together watching sunrise paint the sea in shades of gold and blood. Two people who had learned that survival sometimes required accepting outcomes you could not control, no matter how much it destroyed you to admit it. Mutz. On the 7th day, Eveline opened her eyes with clarity that had been absent since the bleeding started. Lucien was reading correspondence, his hand wrapped around hers even while working. You look terrible, she said. His head snapped up, relief flooding his face so completely it was almost painful to witness. You are awake. Properly awake. How long? 7 days. The doctor says the bleeding has stopped. The baby's heartbeat is strong. You are both going to survive. Eveline felt tears sliding down her face without permission. We made it. You made it. Through will and stubbornness and sheer refusal to let biology win. He leaned down to kiss her forehead, his lips lingering for several heartbeats. Do not ever terrify me like that again. I will do my best. Your best is not negotiable. It is mandatory. Despite the exhaustion and pain, Eveline smiled. Yes, Your Grace. They sat together in morning light while Ravenscar Castle woke around them, two people who had just survived something that should have destroyed them both. But survival, Eveline was learning, was only the first battle. The real war was about to begin. Sags. The attack came exactly 3 weeks later, when Eveline was finally strong enough to walk without assistance. She was in the library with Catherine, reviewing estate accounts, when the explosion shattered the east wing windows. Glass sprayed across stone floors, smoke poured through broken frames. Screams erupted from servants' quarters as fire spread with unnatural speed through corridors designed to be fireproof. This was not an accident. This was war. Catherine grabbed Eveline's arm, pulling her toward the door. We need to find Lucien. They ran through corridors filling with smoke while servants fled in panic. Eveline's body protested every step, her recovery too recent to handle this kind of strain, but fear pushed her forward faster than pain could slow her down. Lucien appeared through smoke like a demon summoned by chaos itself, his face set in expression Eveline recognized as lethal. The North Tower. Now, what is happening? Hollowmere. He did not flee England. He has been planning revenge. Ich arm Shiu. They ran together through Ravenscar's maze, while explosions echoed through stone and fire consumed everything it touched. The castle that had stood for 400 years was being systematically destroyed from the inside out. Hollowmere had planted explosives throughout the structure, and now he was burning House Blackthorne to the ground. They reached the North Tower, the same tower where Lucien's father had died, where Lucien himself had nearly chosen the same path, and barricaded the door behind them. Through narrow windows, they could see armed men surrounding the castle, at least 30, maybe more, all carrying rifles and wearing no identifying colors. Mercenaries again. But this time, there would be no last-minute rescue, no dramatic reversal, just survival or death. Lucien moved to a locked cabinet and pulled out weapons Eveline had never seen. Rifles, pistols, ammunition enough to hold off an army. He had been preparing for this, had known, somehow, that Hollowmere would return. "How long have you known?" Eveline asked. 3 weeks, since you started recovering. I received intelligence that Hollowmere never left England, that he had been recruiting mercenaries and planning an assault. And you said nothing? Lucien's eyes met hers, flat and cold. I said nothing because you were barely surviving, because adding this threat would have destroyed whatever progress you had made, because I was handling it. By preparing an armory, by preparing to defend what is mine. Catherine moved to the window, watching mercenaries close in with military precision. There are too many, even with weapons. We cannot hold them off forever. We do not need forever. We need long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Eveline stared at her husband. What reinforcements? I sent word to every lord who owes House Blackthorne loyalty, to every family we have protected, to every ally who understands that if Ravenscar falls, they are next. They are coming. We just need to survive until they get here. The cold calculation in his voice was terrifying and oddly comforting. Even facing impossible odds, Lucien Blackthorne was still planning 10 moves ahead. How long until they arrive? 2 hours, maybe 3. Another explosion rocked the tower, closer this time. Hollowmere was not waiting for them to surrender. He was coming to finish what he started. Lucien handed Eveline a rifle, then Catherine. You both know how to use these? Yes. Good, because we are about to find out if survival is hereditary or learned. They moved to defensive positions while smoke poured under the door and fire consumed the castle floor by floor. This was not a duel with rules and honor. This was extermination. And the only question was whether House Blackthorne would survive to see dawn. The first wave hit the tower door with battering ram that cracked ancient wood but did not break it. Lucien fired through a narrow window, dropping 2 mercenaries before they could retreat. His movements were mechanical, precise, no wasted motion, no hesitation. He had been trained for this his entire life. Not formal duels with aristocratic rules, but brutal survival against enemies who wanted him dead. Catherine fired next, her shot going wide but close enough to force the attackers into cover. Eveline steadied her rifle against stone that was still warm from explosions, aimed at a man climbing the tower wall, and pulled the trigger. He fell. The second man she had killed. And just like the first time, she felt nothing except grim satisfaction that he had not killed her instead. The battering ram hit the door again. Wood splintered. Another few hits and it would give way completely. Lucien reloaded without looking down, his eyes scanning for targets through smoke that made visibility almost impossible. When they breached the door, you both moved to the far corner. I will hold the entrance. No, Eveline said flatly. That was not a request. And I am not following it. You cannot hold that entrance alone. I can and I will. Then you will die doing it. And I refuse to let our child grow up without a father, because you were too stubborn to accept help. All right? Their eyes met across smoke and chaos and the fundamental disagreement about whether love meant protecting someone or fighting beside them. Lucien's jaw tightened. If you die defending me, I will never forgive you. Then stay alive so neither of us has to test that theory. The door exploded inward. Mercenaries poured through the opening like water through a broken dam, and suddenly the tower was full of men with weapons and no mercy. Lucien met them with rifle fire and cold brutality, dropping 3 before they realized he was not going to surrender quietly. Catherine fired from her corner, hitting one in the shoulder, forcing him back. Eveline aimed carefully, pulling the trigger, watching another man collapse. 3 down, 15 more pushing through smoke. The mathematics were clear, they were going to lose. But losing, Eveline had learned from her husband, was about how long you made your enemies suffer before they claimed victory. A mercenary made it past Lucien's line of fire, lunging toward Eveline with a knife that caught firelight and turned it into threat. She swung her rifle like a club, connecting with his skull hard enough to hear bone crack. He dropped, but 3 more took his place. Lucien was there instantly, moving between Eveline and the attackers, with the kind of protective instinct that overrode tactical sense. He took a knife to his side while protecting her, blood spreading across his shirt in patterns that matched the night he had been shot. But he did not fall, did not even slow down. Just grabbed the mercenary who had stabbed him and threw him out the window with enough force that his scream cut off abruptly when he hit rocks 200 feet below. Catherine was fighting hand-to-hand with another attacker, using everything Lucien had taught her over the past months. She was smaller, weaker, but desperation made her dangerous in ways training never could. She drove a letter opener into the man's throat and watched him bleed out without flinching. The youngest Whitmore's sister had become exactly what survival required, a killer. More mercenaries pushed through the door. Too many. The tower was filling with enemies faster than they could drop them. Eveline's rifle ran out of ammunition. She switched to a pistol, firing until that ran empty too. Then it was just fists and desperation and the brutal understanding that they had minutes left before being overwhelmed completely. Lucien fought like something feral, his injuries forgotten, his focus absolute. He had spent 20 years preparing for enemies who wanted him destroyed, had studied violence the way other men studied philosophy. And now all that preparation was being tested against impossible odds. Blood covered the floor. Bodies piled near the entrance. The tower smelled like gunpowder and death, and smoke that turned breathing into agony. Eveline found herself back-to-back with Lucien, both of them surrounded, both refusing to surrender. "I love you," she said through the chaos. "I know. If we die here, we are not dying here. But if we do, then we die together, like we survived together. No other outcome is acceptable." A mercenary rushed them from the left. Lucien dropped him with a punch that shattered the man's jaw. Another came from the right. Eveline drove her knee into his groin and watched him collapse. They were fighting with the kind of synchronized brutality that came from months of learning each other's rhythms, from understanding that protection meant standing beside someone, not in front of them. Catherine was still fighting near the window, blood streaming from a cut above her eye, her movements growing slower as exhaustion claimed her. She was 19 years old, and she was going to die defending her sister. The thought filled Eveline with rage so complete it burned away exhaustion and fear, and every survival instinct except the need to keep Catherine alive. She grabbed a rifle from a dead mercenary and swung it like a weapon, clearing space around her sister with pure violence. "Stay behind me," Catherine obeyed, her breathing harsh and uneven, her hands shaking from adrenaline and terror. They were losing. The mercenaries kept coming, and reinforcements were still too far away, and any second now the tower would be overrun completely. Lucien knew it too. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the same cold assessment he used when evaluating business deals or political maneuvers. He was determining how many more minutes they could hold, how many more mercenaries they could drop before numbers overwhelmed skill, how long before the 3 of them were dead. And then he did something Eveline had never seen. He smiled. Not the cold, controlled expression he used in public. A real smile. Wild. Dangerous. The smile of a man who had finally accepted that survival was not always possible, but fighting was always mandatory. "When I give the signal," he said quietly, "you and Catherine run for the servants' passage behind the north wall. There's a tunnel that leads to the cliffs. You follow it to the beach. You hide until reinforcements arrive. No. Eveline, I am not leaving you here to die alone. You are pregnant with my child. You do not get to die in a tower defending my pride. And you do not get to sacrifice yourself so we can escape. We survive together, or we die together. Those were your words. His hand found hers for exactly 2 seconds. His hand found, squeezing hard enough to hurt. Then we survive together. But if it comes down to choosing between your life and mine, I am choosing yours. Every time. Without hesitation. Before Eveline could argue, a sound cut through the chaos. Distant but unmistakable. Horses. Hundreds of them. Reinforcements. The mercenaries heard it too. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Their assault hesitated. And in that moment of uncertainty, Lucien Blackthorne became the predator London had always feared. He moved through the tower like death itself, dropping mercenaries with brutal efficiency, driving them back toward the broken door, reclaiming space inch by bloody inch. Catherine and Eveline fought beside him, 3 people who had learned that family was worth any cost, even the cost of becoming monsters. The sound of horses grew louder, closer, then voices, English voices, shouting orders and demanding surrender. The mercenaries broke. Those who could run fled through windows and doors, abandoning the assault, choosing survival over payment. Within minutes, the tower was silent except for breathing and the crackling of fires still consuming the castle below. Lucien stood amid bodies and blood, his side bleeding heavily, his face carved from exhaustion and victory. Lord Marcus Ashford appeared in the doorway, alive despite being shot 3 weeks ago, leading 50 armed men wearing Blackthorne colors. "Your Grace, you sent for assistance." Lucien's voice was rough. "You are late." "Apologies. We encountered resistance on the road." "Did you kill them?" "Thoroughly." "Good." Then Lucien's legs gave out. He collapsed like a building finally surrendering to structural damage, and Eveline was beside him instantly, her hands pressing against the knife wound that had been bleeding steadily for 20 minutes. "Get the doctor, now." Servants appeared. The doctor materialized. Lucien was carried to chambers that had not been destroyed, and for the second time in a month, Eveline watched physicians try to save her husband's life while she stood helpless. Catherine gripped her hand tightly. "He will survive. He is too stubborn to die. That is what I thought about me." "And you did survive. So will he." They waited through hours that felt like decades while the doctor worked and Ravenscar burned and the empire they had built through blood and survival teetered on the edge of collapse. Finally, the doctor emerged. He will live. The knife missed vital organs. He lost significant blood, but his body is responding to treatment. Eveline's legs nearly gave out from relief. "Can I see him?" "Briefly. He needs rest." She entered the chamber to find Lucien unconscious but breathing steadily, his chest rising and falling with reassuring rhythm. She sat beside him, taking his hand, feeling his pulse strong beneath her fingers. "You are an idiot," she whispered. "Fighting like that while injured. You could have died." His eyes opened slowly, focusing on her with effort. "Worth it? How is dying to protect me worth it?" "Because you survived. Because our child survived. Because Catherine survived. Everything else is acceptable." Eveline wanted to argue but could not find words past the emotion choking her throat. "Hollowmere escaped during the chaos, but he will not survive long. I have sent word to every corner of England. He is a dead man who simply does not know it yet. And the castle can be rebuilt. Stone is replaceable. You are not." She leaned down to kiss his forehead, tasting salt and smoke and blood. "Rest. I will handle everything until you recover." "You always do." His eyes closed again, exhaustion claiming him completely. Eveline sat beside him through the night while servants fought fires and reinforcements secured the perimeter. Ravenscar Castle smoldered like a funeral pyre for enemies who had tried and failed to destroy House Blackthorne. They had survived, barely. But survival was all that mattered. And survivors, she had learned, were the most dangerous people in the world, because they had nothing left to lose except each other. Dawn revealed the full extent of the damage. Half the castle was destroyed. The east wing had collapsed completely. Fires had gutted 3 towers and damaged the Great Hall beyond immediate repair. But the foundations remained. The structure that had stood for 400 years refused to fall. Catherine found Eveline in the ruins of the library, staring at burnt books and shattered furniture. How bad? Catastrophic, but survivable. That seems to be our specialty. Us. Eveline turned to her sister, seeing someone who had transformed from frightened girl into warrior over the course of 6 months. Thank you for fighting beside me. Catherine's smile was tired. Where else would I be? They stood together in destruction while servants began the impossible task of rebuilding. 2 women who had learned that family meant fighting side by side even when survival seemed impossible. Lord Ashford approached with news that made Eveline's blood run cold. Your Grace, we found Hollowmere's base of operations in the village. He had been planning this assault for months. But there's something else you need to see. He handed her a letter written in Hollowmere's handwriting. Eveline read it twice before understanding penetrated. Then she walked back to Lucien's chambers with fury burning away exhaustion. He was awake, sitting up despite the doctor's orders, already reviewing damage reports. Hollowmere had help, she said without preamble. Inside help. Someone in this castle has been feeding him information for months. Lucien's expression went completely flat. Who? The letter does not specify. But someone told him when I was injured, when our defenses were weakest, when reinforcements would arrive. Someone betrayed us. The words hung between them like a death sentence. For months they had been fighting external enemies, but the real threat had been inside Ravenscar all along. Find them, Lucien said quietly. His voice carried the kind of cold finality that preceded executions. Find them and bring them to me. No mercy, no exceptions. Betrayal has consequences. Eveline nodded once. Then she walked out to hunt the traitor who had nearly destroyed everything they had built. Because loyalty, she had learned from her husband, was the only currency that mattered in war. And betrayal was the only crime that demanded absolute punishment. The traitor was found in the wine cellar at dawn, trying to escape through tunnels that led to the village. Mrs. Kane stood with her back against cold stone, her face carved from resignation and something that looked dangerously close to relief. 40 years of service to House Blackthorne. 40 years of perfect loyalty. Until Hollowmere had offered her something Lucien never could. Freedom. Eveline descended the stairs slowly, each step echoing through darkness that smelled like earth and betrayal. Catherine followed 3 paces behind, her hand resting on the pistol she now carried everywhere. Lord Ashford waited at the entrance, blocking any escape route the housekeeper might attempt. Mrs. Kane did not try to run. She just stood there, watching the Duchess approach with eyes that had witnessed 4 generations of Blackthorne violence and had finally decided she wanted no part of the 5th. Eveline stopped 5 feet away, studying the woman who had managed Ravenscar's household since before Lucien was born, who had trained every servant, who had known every secret, every weakness, every vulnerability the castle possessed, who had sold all of it to a man who wanted them dead. Why? Son? The question was simple. The answer would determine whether mercy existed in a world built on blood. Mrs. Kane's laugh was bitter. Why? Because I have spent 40 years serving monsters who called it duty. Because I watched the old Duke walk off that tower and nobody cared except to calculate how quickly they could claim his estate. Because I watched you transform from victim into predator and called it survival. Because I am tired of pretending this family deserves the loyalty they demand. So you helped Hollowmere murder us. I helped him end a cycle of violence that has consumed this castle for centuries. House Blackthorne does not build. It destroys. It takes. It grinds people into dust and calls it power. I wanted to see it burn. Eveline absorbed the words carefully, recognizing truth when it cut deep enough to draw blood. Mrs. Kane was not wrong. House Blackthorne had built an empire on other people's suffering, had maintained dominance through fear and leverage and brutal efficiency, had created exactly the kind of world where betrayal felt like justice. You were free to leave at any time. Was I? With the secrets I carried, with the knowledge of how this empire functions, the moment I left, I would have become a threat. And House Blackthorne eliminates threats. You know this better than anyone, Your Grace. You became one to survive. Catherine moved forward, her voice cold. She helped orchestrate an attack that nearly killed my sister while she was pregnant, that nearly killed Lucien, that destroyed half this castle. She does not deserve philosophical debate. She deserves execution. Mrs. Kane's eyes shifted to the younger woman. You are so eager for blood now, Lady Catherine. What happened to the frightened girl who arrived here 4 months ago? She learned what survival costs, from teachers who did not hesitate to destroy anyone who threatened their family. And now you are exactly like them. Congratulations. The cycle continues. Eveline raised one hand, silencing further argument. Her mind was calculating possibilities with the same cold precision Lucien had taught her. Execution would satisfy justice and send a message that betrayal carried absolute consequences. But execution would also prove Mrs. Kane right, would demonstrate that House Blackthorne solved every problem through violence, would ensure the cycle never broke. She thought about the child growing inside her, about the world that child would inherit, about whether legacy meant power or something more complicated, about whether monsters could choose to become something else. You are exiled, Eveline said finally. Tonight, you take nothing except the clothes you wear. You speak to no one about what you know. If I ever hear your name again, if any information you possess surfaces anywhere, I will hunt you down personally. Not with mercy, not with quick death, with the same creativity you used when planning our destruction. Do you understand? Mrs. Kane's expression flickered with surprise. You are letting me live. I'm giving you what you wanted, freedom. Use it to build something that does not require destroying others, or use it to rot in whatever hole you crawl into. I do not care. But you do not get to die a martyr. You do not get to claim House Blackthorne proved your point by executing you. You get to live with your choices and whatever consequences come from them naturally. Catherine grabbed Eveline's arm. This is a mistake. She will talk. She will expose us. Then we will handle it. But I will not become the monster she claims we are just to prove her wrong. Sometimes strength is knowing when to stop killing. She turned to Lord Ashford. Escort her to the village. Provide a horse and supplies for 3 days. Then make sure she understands that returning means death. Ashford nodded, moving to take Mrs. Kane's arm. The woman looked at Eveline with expression that mixed contempt and something that might have been respect. You will regret this, Mercy, Your Grace. Possibly. But I will not regret becoming someone my child can look at without seeing a killer. Mrs. Kane was led away through tunnels that had been built for escape centuries ago, and Eveline stood alone in the wine cellar with Catherine beside her. Lucien is going to be furious, Catherine said quietly. Lucien does not get to make every decision, not anymore. If we are building a future worth protecting, it starts with choosing when not to destroy. They climbed the stairs together while dawn broke over Ravenscar's ruins, and Eveline tried not to think about whether mercy was wisdom or weakness. Whether choosing life over death made her stronger or just naive enough to be destroyed by enemies she should have eliminated. Whether monsters could ever truly become human again after tasting blood. Lucien woke to find Eveline sitting beside his bed, staring out the window at destruction that would take years to repair. You let her go. Not a question. Somehow he already knew. Yes. That was strategically unsound. She possesses information that could destroy us. She possesses information about an empire built on fear. If we want to build something different, we start by not executing every person who challenges us. Lucien sat up slowly, wincing at injuries that were healing but still painful. His eyes locked onto his wife with intensity that felt like being examined under glass. You're changing the rules. I'm deciding what kind of ruler I want to be, what kind of parent, what kind of person. And executing a 60-year-old woman for helping our enemies felt like becoming exactly what she accused us of being. She tried to kill us. She tried to end what she saw as a cycle of violence. She was wrong about the method, but maybe not wrong about the problem. Silence stretched between them while morning light cut through smoke-damaged windows. Finally, Lucien spoke, his voice rough. My father would have had her hanged. My grandfather would have made an example that terrified every servant in England. Every duke before me would have chosen violence over mercy. And what would you choose? Wait. Ma says. He stared at her for several heartbeats. Then something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly, but recognizing. I would choose whatever kept you safe, even if that meant questioning 40 years of family tradition. Eveline moved from her chair to sit on the edge of his bed, her hand finding his. I'm not asking you to become soft. I'm asking you to consider that maybe strength looks different than what we were taught. That maybe our child deserves to inherit an empire built on something other than fear. Fear is effective. Fear is expensive. It requires constant maintenance, constant violence, constant proof that rebellion means death. I am tired, Lucien. I am tired of fighting. I am tired of becoming someone I do not recognize. I am tired of wondering if survival is worth the cost we keep paying. Lucien pulled her down beside him. Said. Lucien pulled her down, wrapping his good arm around her with surprising gentleness. I know, I am tired too. They lay together in damaged chambers while the castle smoldered and servants worked to save what remained. Two people who had spent 6 months learning to survive and were only now learning what came after survival. What do we do now? Eveline asked quietly. We rebuild. Not just the castle, everything. We rebuild House Blackthorne into something our child will be proud to inherit, even if that means destroying everything my ancestors built to create something better. That is a pretty speech. It is an honest one. You changed me, Eveline. Somewhere between that chapel and this bed, you made me believe that maybe love is not weakness, that maybe vulnerability is not suicide, that maybe the strongest thing I can do is admit I was wrong about almost everything. Eveline pressed her face into his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her cheek. I love you, even when you are stubborn and controlling and convinced you know better than everyone. I love you. Even when you question my judgment and make decisions that terrify me and refuse to let me protect you the way I was trained to protect everything. They held each other while Ravenscar settled around them, and for the first time in months, neither felt like they were waiting for the next attack, just existing in the strange calm that followed surviving the unsurvivable. The reconstruction took 6 months. Lucien hired every builder in Northumberland to restore what fire had destroyed. The east wing rose from ashes with stronger foundations. The towers were rebuilt with modern reinforcements. The Great Hall was reconstructed with windows that let in more light than the original had ever allowed. Ravenscar Castle was transforming from fortress into something that almost resembled a home. Eveline managed the project with the same precision she had learned managing the household, but now with authority that came from surviving assassination attempts and exile threats. Servants no longer lowered their eyes when she passed. They met her gaze with respect that had been earned through blood and leadership. Catherine took over the castle's charitable foundations completely, using Blackthorne wealth to fund schools and medical clinics throughout the territory. She was 19 years old and wielding power most nobles never achieved, but she wielded it carefully, remembering what desperation had driven her father to do. Remembering that empires built on other people's suffering eventually collapsed under the weight of their own cruelty. The three of them, Lucien, Eveline, and Catherine, formed a leadership structure that London society had never seen. A duke who listened to his wife's counsel. A duchess who made decisions without requiring approval. A sister-in-law who controlled charity budgets larger than most estates. House Blackthorne was still powerful, but the power felt different now, less like domination and more like responsibility. News of Mrs. Kane's exile spread through noble circles with the speed of all good scandals. Half of London expected Lucien to hunt her down and make an example. The other half waited for her to sell secrets that would destroy House Blackthorne permanently. Neither happened. The woman disappeared into Europe and was never heard from again. Either she had learned from her mistakes, or she had died quietly somewhere. Nobody knew. Nobody cared enough to investigate. And slowly, over months of rebuilding, Eveline realized something that changed how she understood power. Mercy was not weakness. It was the most expensive thing rulers could afford, because mercy required believing the future could be different than the past, required accepting that not every enemy needed to be destroyed, required trusting that change was possible even in systems built on violence. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, harder than killing to protect Lucien, harder than threatening his mother into exile, harder than surviving pregnancy complications that should have killed her, because mercy required becoming someone new, someone who could look at destruction and choose to build instead of burning everything to the ground. The baby came in early spring, during the season when Ravenscar transformed from winter fortress into something almost beautiful. Eveline's labor lasted 14 hours, long enough that Lucien wore a path in the corridor outside their chambers, long enough that Catherine had to physically prevent him from breaking down the door when screams echoed through stone, long enough that he started calculating how many doctors' lives he would destroy if his wife did not survive. Then silence, terrible, absolute silence that made Lucien's heart stop. The door opened. The midwife emerged smiling. "Your Grace, you have a son." Lucien pushed past her into chambers that smelled like blood and birth and something that might have been hope. Eveline lay in bed, exhausted and pale and holding a tiny creature wrapped in blankets. Their son, perfect, screaming, alive. Lucien approached slowly, like the child might vanish if he moved too quickly. When he reached the bed, Eveline looked up at him with expression that mixed exhaustion and triumph and love so complete it hurt to witness. "Meet Alexander Blackthorne, future Duke of Ravenscar, current destroyer of my ability to sleep." Lucien's hands shook as he took the baby, cradling him with the same careful precision he applied to everything valuable and fragile. Alexander quieted instantly, his small face scrunching up as he studied his father with eyes that would eventually be gray like Lucien's. For several seconds, Lucien could not breathe. This creature was his son, his legacy, his chance to do better than every Blackthorne who had come before, his opportunity to prove that cycles could be broken. "Hello, Alexander," he said quietly. "I am your father, and I promise you something right now. I promise you will never question whether you are loved. You will never wonder if survival requires becoming a monster. You will never stand on a tower considering whether death is easier than life. Because I will teach you something my father never taught me, that strength is not about domination, that power is not about fear, that the bravest thing you can do is choose vulnerability even when every instinct screams to hide." Eveline's hand found his arm. "That was a good speech. It was an honest one." Catherine appeared in the doorway, her eyes filling with tears when she saw the baby. "He is beautiful. He is a Blackthorne. Beautiful is not the word I would use. Dangerous, perhaps. Stubborn, certainly. But beautiful works, too." They stood together in chambers where light streamed through new windows and medical equipment had been cleared away. 3 people who had survived impossible odds now holding the future in their arms. Alexander would grow up in a castle that had been rebuilt from ruins, would learn from parents who had killed to protect each other but chose mercy when mercy mattered, would inherit an empire that was learning to value something other than fear, would have a chance to become something better than what his ancestors had been. And that chance, Lucien realized as he held his son for the first time, was worth every battle they had fought, worth every scar, worth every moment of terror and pain and transformation. Because legacy was not about power. It was about what you left behind after the fighting stopped. Petit. Summer came to Ravenscar with warmth that felt almost foreign after years of cold stone and colder hearts. Lucien stood on the battlements at dawn, holding Alexander while Eveline slept, and the castle woke around them. His son was 3 months old now, growing fast, already showing signs of the Blackthorne temperament, stubborn, demanding, absolutely certain the world should bend to his will. Lucien loved him with intensity that terrified him, because love, he had learned, was the most dangerous weapon that existed, made you vulnerable, made you weak, made you willing to destroy yourself to protect what mattered most. But it also made you human. And humanity, he was discovering, was worth the cost. Footsteps on stone announced Eveline's arrival. She moved to stand beside him, looking out at territory that stretched from cliffs to horizon. "You're thinking too loudly." "I am thinking about my father, about what he would say if he saw what we built." "What do you think he would say?" Lucien considered the question carefully. His father had loved completely and died broken, had believed vulnerability was strength and paid for that belief with his life. Had chosen a woman over an empire and lost both. I think he would say I was right to be afraid. That love destroyed him and could destroy me too. That opening yourself to another person is suicide disguised as connection. And what would you say back? That he was wrong. Love did not destroy him. The absence of love destroyed him. Losing someone he needed to survive destroyed him. But having that love in the first place, that was the only thing that made his life worth living. Eveline's hand found his, their fingers interlacing while Alexander slept against his father's chest. "We are going to make mistakes," she said quietly. "As parents, as rulers, as people trying to be better than what we were taught. We are going to fail sometimes, hurt people we do not mean to hurt, make choices that seem right in the moment and wrong in hindsight. I know. And we are going to survive those mistakes, together, because that is what we do. We survive." Lucien turned to look at his wife, this woman who had been sold to him like property, and somehow become the only person he trusted completely. "I do not deserve you." "Probably not, but you are stuck with me anyway." "Good, because I have no intention of existing in a world without you." They stood together while sunrise painted the sea in shades of gold, and Alexander stirred against Lucien's chest, waking to a world that was still dangerous but slightly less brutal than the one his parents had inherited. And in that moment, Lucien understood something that had taken 40 years to learn. Power was temporary, fear was expensive, domination was exhausting, but love, messy, complicated, terrifying love, was the only thing that lasted after the empire crumbled and the enemies were defeated and the fighting finally stopped. It was the only legacy worth leaving. 10 years passed. Ravenscar Castle stood stronger than ever, rebuilt from ruins into something that balanced fortress pragmatism with enough warmth that children actually wanted to live there. Alexander Blackthorne was 10 years old, tall for his age, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn refusal to accept limitations. He spent mornings studying with tutors who taught him mathematics and philosophy and languages. Spent afternoons learning to manage estates and navigate politics and understand that power was responsibility disguised as privilege. Spent evenings with parents who loved him enough to be honest about their own failures. He would never be perfect, would make mistakes, would struggle with the Blackthorne temperament that demanded control and feared vulnerability. But he would grow up knowing love was not weakness. That would make all the difference. Eveline stood in the library watching her son argue with his tutor about philosophy, and smiled at how much he resembled Lucien when frustrated. Catherine entered, carrying correspondence that required attention. She was 29 now, unmarried by choice, managing charitable foundations that had improved life across 3 counties. She had received numerous marriage proposals over the years and rejected them all. Some women, she had learned, were not meant to be owned. The minister from London is requesting a meeting next month, something about new trade policies. Tell him we will consider it, after reviewing his voting record on labor protections. Catherine smiled. You are becoming more ruthless every year. I am becoming more strategic. There is a difference. Is there? Yes. Ruthless means destroying everyone. Strategic means destroying only the people who deserve it. They shared a look that acknowledged how far they had both come from the frightened women who had arrived at Ravenscar a decade ago. Lucien found them an hour later, reviewing documents and making decisions that would affect thousands of lives. He stopped in the doorway, watching his wife and sister-in-law work with the same synchronized efficiency they brought to everything, and felt something that might have been contentment. Not happiness, exactly. Blackthorns were not built for uncomplicated happiness, but satisfaction. The knowledge that what they had built was worth the cost of building it. You are staring, Eveline said without looking up. I am appreciating. Same thing. He crossed to her, his hand settling on her shoulder with casual affection that would have been impossible years ago. Alexander wants to visit the cliffs. I told him we would go together. All of us? All of us. Catherine looked up. I have work to finish. The work will wait. Family does not. It was the kind of statement the old Lucien would never have made. Work always came first. Empire demanded constant attention. Family was something you protected but never prioritized. But the man Lucien had become understood something his ancestors never had. Empire without family was just architecture waiting to collapse. They walked together to the cliffs where sea met sky, and wind carried the smell of salt and freedom. Alexander ran ahead, fearless in the way children were fearless when they had never experienced real loss. Lucien and Eveline followed more slowly, hands linked, comfortable in silence that spoke of years spent learning each other's rhythms. "Do you ever regret it?" Eveline asked. "What we became to survive?" Lucien considered the question carefully. Did he regret killing to protect her? No. Did he regret the violence and manipulation and brutal efficiency that had built their empire? Sometimes. Did he regret learning to love someone completely, despite knowing it made him vulnerable? Never. I regret that we had to become hard to survive, but I do not regret surviving, and I do not regret becoming someone you could love. Even though loving me made you weak, loving you made me human. There is a difference. They reached the cliff edge where Lucien's father had died 40 years ago, where Lucien himself had almost chosen the same path, where death had seemed easier than vulnerability. Now it just looked like stone and sea and distance. "I come here sometimes," Lucien admitted, "to remember what I survived, to remind myself that fear is not the same as wisdom, that choosing to live is braver than choosing to die." "Your father would be proud of you." "My father was weak." "Your father was human, just like you, just like all of us." Alexander called from further down the cliff path, his voice carrying on wind that had witnessed generations of Blackthorne tragedy. "Father, come see what I found." Lucien squeezed Eveline's hand once, then released it to follow his son, and she watched them walk together with something that felt like peace settling over her chest. They had survived. Not just the violence and betrayal and constant warfare that came with power, but the transformation from victims into predators into something more complicated, into people who understood that strength was not about never breaking. It was about what you built after the breaking was done. That night, after Alexander was asleep and Catherine had retired to her chambers, Lucien and Eveline stood together in their bedroom overlooking the sea. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of battles fought and survived. 10 years of learning that love was not gentle, but it was real. "Do you remember what you said to me the night I stood on that tower?" Lucien asked quietly. "I said a lot of things. You said I was dying slowly, that I was too proud to die quickly like my father, but I was killing myself anyway. I remember. You were right, I was dying. Had been dying since my mother left and my father walked off that edge. Had been so afraid of becoming him that I became something worse. A man without connections, without vulnerability, without anything resembling humanity." He turned to face her, his hands framing her face with gentleness that had taken years to develop. "You saved me, not by making me soft, by showing me that strength looks different than I thought, that the bravest thing I could do was admit I needed someone, that survival without love is just waiting to die." Eveline's hands covered his. "You saved me too, taught me to fight, taught me to protect what matters, taught me that being owned is different than being valued. You made me dangerous, and dangerous women survive. We are quite a pair. We are monsters who learn to be human. That is better than most people achieve." Lucien kissed her then, slow and deep, tasting like a decade of surviving together and promises to survive decades more. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you. I will love you until this castle crumbles and the sea claims what is left. I will love you past death if death allows it. You are everything I never knew I needed." That was very poetic for someone who spent 20 years believing poetry was weakness. "You corrupted me." Good. You needed corrupting. They stood together in darkness while Ravenscar settled around them. The castle that had witnessed so much violence now holding something gentler. Not peace exactly. Blackthorns were not built for uncomplicated peace, but satisfaction, understanding. The knowledge that what they had built together was worth every scar. Outside, the sea crashed against cliffs that would stand long after they were gone. Inside, their son slept safely in chambers designed to protect him from threats that might never come. And between them, love existed in all its messy, complicated, absolutely essential glory. This was not a fairy tale ending. Fairy tales lied about what love required. This was something better. This was survival transforming into life. Monsters learning to be human. Predators choosing to protect instead of destroy. Two people who had been taught that love was weakness, proving that love was the only strength that mattered. And in a world built on blood and betrayal, that was as close to victory as anyone could expect. Pesk. 20 years later, Duke Alexander Blackthorne stood on the same battlements where his father had once held him at dawn. He was 30 years old now, newly married to a woman who challenged him the way his mother had challenged his father, preparing to inherit an empire that had been rebuilt from ruins. His parents were older now, slower, but still formidable in the way people who had survived the unsurvivable were always formidable. Lucien found him watching sunrise paint the sea in familiar colors. "You are thinking too loudly." Alexander smiled. His father had said that to his mother for decades. Now the cycle continued. "I'm thinking about what it means to inherit this, whether I can be half the duke you became." Lucien moved to stand beside his son, studying territory he had protected for 40 years through blood and strategy, and eventually through something resembling wisdom. "You will make different choices than I made, face different enemies, build different alliances. That is not failure. That is progress. And if I fail, well, then you will survive the failure and try again. That is what Blackthorns do. We survive. Is that all we are? Survivors?" Lucien looked at his son, seeing himself 40 years ago. Ambitious, terrified, convinced that power was the only language worth speaking. No. We are people who learned that surviving is not enough, that legacy is not about how much you control, but what you leave behind, that the strongest thing you can do is admit you cannot do everything alone. Alexander absorbed this quietly. Then, "Did you love her immediately, mother?" "No, I bought her, owned her, treated her like property. Then slowly, terrifyingly, she became the only person I could not exist without. Love was not immediate. It was earned through surviving together." That does not sound romantic. Romance is for people who have never fought for their lives beside someone. What your mother and I built was stronger than romance. It was partnership forged in fire, understanding carved from violence, love that survived because we chose it every day, even when choosing it was harder than walking away. They stood together while the sun rose over Ravenscar, and Alexander finally understood what his father had been teaching him for 30 years. Power was temporary. Fear was expensive. But love, complicated, difficult, absolutely essential love, was the only thing that lasted after everything else burned away. It was the only legacy worth claiming. Eveline found them an hour later, two dukes of Ravenscar standing together on battlements that had witnessed 4 generations of family drama. "Are you two finished being philosophical? Breakfast is ready and your wife is asking questions about estate management that I cannot answer." Alexander laughed. "She does that. Tests whether I have been paying attention to the lessons." "Smart woman. Do not let her go." "I will not." He walked back toward the castle, leaving his parents alone with sunrise and memories and the strange satisfaction of knowing they had survived long enough to see their legacy continue. Lucien's arm wrapped around Eveline's waist, pulling her close with casual affection that had taken years to feel natural. "We did well. We survived. There is a difference." "Is there?" Eveline looked up at her husband, this man who had bought her and learned to love her and somehow become the person she trusted most in the world. "No, I suppose there is not. Surviving is the best any of us can hope for. Everything else is just decoration." They walked back to the castle together, two people who had spent 30 years learning what love required. And Eveline thought about the girl who had entered that chapel 3 decades ago, terrified, powerless, convinced her life was ending. She had been wrong. Her life had been beginning, not the life she expected, not the gentle romantic story she had been taught to want, but something better, something real, something built on survival and partnership and the brutal understanding that love was not gentle, but it was worth fighting for. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask, to be seen completely, to be loved anyway, to build something that lasted after the fighting stopped. The rest was just noise. The Duke and Duchess of Ravenscar lived another 20 years after that morning, long enough to see their son become the kind of ruler who balanced power with compassion, long enough to meet their grandchildren and teach them that legacy was not about domination, but responsibility, long enough to watch the empire they built transform into something that valued people over profit, long enough to know they had succeeded, not because they had conquered England, but because they had learned to be human while doing it. When Lucien finally died, it was in his sleep beside his wife, his hand wrapped around hers even in unconsciousness. When Eveline followed him 6 months later, it was with a smile on her face and their son holding her other hand. They were buried together on the cliffs where Lucien's father had died, but the headstone did not mention power or titles or the empire they had built. It simply read, "Here lie two people who learned that love was stronger than fear." And in a world built on blood and betrayal, that was the truest thing anyone could say. The story of Duke Lucien Blackthorne and Duchess Eveline would be told for generations. Some versions claimed he was a monster who destroyed everyone he touched. Some claimed she was a saint who tamed the beast. Both were wrong. They were just two people who had been taught that survival required becoming hard, who learned that surviving was not enough, who discovered that the bravest thing anyone could do was choose vulnerability even when every instinct screamed to hide. They were just two people who refused to let the world destroy them, who built an empire on ruins, who learned that love was not weakness, but the only real strength that existed. They were just two people who survived. And sometimes, survival is the only victory that matters.